Chapter 16 of Queen Sheba's Ring. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by deongines, Salt Lake City, Utah. Queen Sheba's Ring by H. Rider Haggard. Chapter 16. Harmac Comes to Myrrh. Slowly and in very bad spirits, I retraced my steps to the old temple, following the line of the telephone wire which Higgs and Quick had unreeled as they went. In the sergeant's prognostications of evil, I had no particular belief, as they seemed to me to be born of the circumstances which surrounded us, and in different ways affected all our minds, even that of the buoyant Higgs. To take my own case, for instance, here I was about to assist in an act which, for aught I knew, might involve the destruction of my only son. It was true, we believed that this was the night of his marriage at the town of Harmac, some miles away, and that the tale of our spies supported this information. But how could we be sure that the date or the place of the ceremony had not been changed at the last moment? Supposing, for instance, that it was held not in the town as arranged, but in the courts of the idol, and that the fearful activities of the fiery agent which we were about to wake to life should sweep the celebrants into nothingness. The thought made me turn cold, and yet the deed must be done. Roderick must take his chance, and if all were well, and he escaped that danger, were there not worse behind? Think of him, a Christian man, the husband of a savage woman who worshipped a stone image with a lion's head, bound to her and her tribe, a state prisoner, trebly guarded, whom, so far as I could see, there would be no hope of rescuing. It was awful. Then there were other complications. If the plan succeeded and the idol was destroyed, my own belief was that the Fung must thereby be exasperated. Evidently, they knew some road into this stronghold. It would be used. They would pour their thousands up it. A general massacre would follow, of which, justly, we should be the first victims. I reached the chamber where Oliver sat brooding, alone, for Japhet was patrolling the line. "I am not happy about Maqueda, Doctor," he said to me. "I am afraid there is something in that story. She wanted to be with us. Indeed, she begged to be allowed to come, almost with tears. But I wouldn't have it, since accidents may always happen. The vibration may shake in the roof or something. In fact, I don't think you should be here. Why don't you go away and leave me?" I answered that nothing would induce me to do so, for such a job should not be left to one man. "No, you're right," he said. "I might faint or lose my head or anything. I wish now that we had arranged to send the spark from the palace, which perhaps we might have done by joining the telephone wire onto the others. But to tell you the truth, I'm afraid of the batteries. The cells are new, but very weak, for time and the climate have affected them. And I thought it possible the extra difference might make the difference, and that they would fail to work. That's why I fixed this as the firing point. Hello, there's the bell. What have they got to say?" I snatched the receiver and presently heard the cheerful voice of Higgs announcing that they had arrived safely in the little anteroom to Maqueda's private apartments. "The palace seems very empty," he added. "We only met one sentry, for I think that everybody else, except Maqueda and a few of her ladies, have cleared out, being afraid lest rocks should fall on them when the explosion occurs." "Did the man say so?" I asked of Higgs. "Yes, something of that sort. Also, he wanted to forbid us to come here, saying that it was against the Prince Joshua's orders that we Gentiles should approach the private apartments of the Child of Kings. Well, we soon settled that, and he bolted. Where to? Oh, I don't know. To report, he said. How's Quick? I asked. Much the same as usual. In fact, he is saying his prayers in the corner, looking like a melancholy brigand with rifles, revolvers, and knives stuck all over him. I wish he wouldn't say his prayers, added Higgs, and his voice reached me in an indignant squeak. It makes me feel uncomfortable, as though I ought to join him. But not having been brought up as a dissenter or a Moslem, I can't pray in public as he does. Hello, wait a minute, will you? Then followed a longish pause, and after it, Higgs' voice again. It's all right, it said, only one of Maqueda's ladies who had heard us and come to see who we were. When she learns, I expect she will join us here, as the girl says she's nervous and can't sleep. Higgs proved right in his anticipations, for in about 10 minutes we were rung up again, this time by Maqueda herself, whereon I handed the receiver to Oliver and retired to the other end of the room. Nor, to tell the truth, was I sorry for the interruption, since it cheered up Oliver and helped to pass the time. The next thing worth telling that happened was that an hour or more later Japhet arrived, looking very frightened. We asked him our usual question, if anything was wrong with the wires. With a groan he answered, no, the wires seemed all right, but he had met a ghost. What ghost, you donkey? I said. The ghost of one of the dead kings, O physician, yonder in the burial cave. It was he with the bent bones who sits in the farthest chair, only he had put some flesh on his bones, and I tell you he looked fearful, a very fierce man, or rather ghost. Indeed, and did he say anything to you, Japhet? Oh, yes, plenty, O physician, only I could not understand it all, because his language was somewhat different to mine, and he spat out his words as a green log spits out sparks. I think that he asked me, however, how my miserable people dared to destroy his god, Harmac. I answered that I was only a servant and did not know, adding that he should put his questions to you. And what did he say to that, Japhet? I think he said that Harmac would come to Mur and settle his account with the Abati, and that the foreign men would be wise to fly fast and far. That's all I understood. Ask me no more, who would not return into that cave to be made a prince. He's got hold of what Barung's envoys told us, said Oliver indifferently, and no wonder, this place is enough to make anybody see ghosts. I'll repeat it to Maqueda. It will amuse her. I wouldn't if I were you, I answered, for it isn't exactly a cheerful yarn, and perhaps she's afraid of ghosts too. Also, and I pointed to the watch that lay on the table beside the batteries, it is 5 minutes to 10. Oh, that last 5 minutes! It seemed as many centuries. Like stone statues we sat, each of us lost in his own thoughts, though for my part the power of clear thinking appeared to have left me. Visions of a sort flowed over my mind without sinking into it, as water flows over marble. All I could do was fix my eyes on the face of that watch, of which, in the flickering lamplight, the second hand seemed to my excited fancy to grow enormous and jump from one side of the room to the other. Orme began to count aloud. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, and almost simultaneously he touched the knob first of one battery and next of the other. Before his finger pressed the left-hand knob, I felt the solid rock beneath us surge. No other word conveys its movement. Then the great stone cross-piece, weighing several tons, that was set as a transom above the tall door of our room, dislodged itself and fell quite gently into the doorway, which it completely blocked. Other rocks fell also at a distance, making a great noise, and somehow I found myself on the ground. My stool had slid away from me. Next followed a muffled, awful roar, and with it came a blast of wind, blowing where wind never blew before since the beginning of the world. That with a terrible wailing howled itself to silence in the thousand recesses of the cave city. As it passed, our lamps went out. Lastly, quite a minute later, I should think, there was a thud, as though something of enormous weight had fallen on the surface of the earth, far above us. Then all was as it had been. All was darkness and utter quietude. "Well, that's over," said Oliver, in a strained voice, which sounded very small and far away through that thick darkness. "All over for good or ill. I needn't have been anxious. The first battery was strong enough, for I felt the mine spring as I touched the second. I wonder," he went on, as though speaking to himself, "what amount of damage nearly a ton and a half of that awful azomide compound has done to the old sphinx. According to my calculations, it ought to have been enough to break the thing up if we could have spread the charge more. But as it is, I am by no means certain. It may only have driven a hole in its bulk, especially if there were hollows through which the gases could run. Well, with luck, we may know more about it later. Strike a match, Adams, and light those lamps. Why, what's that? Listen." As he spoke, from somewhere came a series of tiny noises that, though they were so faint and small, suggested rifles fired at a great distance. Crack, 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 went the infinitesimal noises. I groped about, and finding the receiver of the field telephone, set it to my ear. In an instant all grew plain to me. Guns were being fired near the other end of the wire, and the transmitter was sending us the sound of them. Very faintly, but with distinctness, I could hear Higgs' high voice saying, "Look out, Sergeant, there's another rush coming," and Quick answering, "Shoot low, Professor, for the Lord's sake, shoot low. You are empty, sir, load up, load up. Here's a clip of cartridges, don't fire too fast. Ah, that devil got me, but I've got him. He'll never throw another spear." "They are being attacked," I exclaimed. "Quick is wounded. Now Maqueda is talking to you. She says, 'Oliver, come. Joshua's men assail me. Oliver, come.'" Then followed a great sound of shouting, answered by more shots, and just as Orme snatched the receiver from my hand, the wire went dead. In vain he called down it in an agonized voice. As well might he have addressed the planet Saturn. "The wire's out," he exclaimed, dashing down the receiver and seizing the lantern which Japhet had just succeeded in relighting. "Come on, there's murder being done," and he sprang to the doorway, only to stagger back again from the great stone with which it was blocked. "Good God!" he screamed, "we're shut in. How can we get out? How can we get out?" And he began to run round and round the room, and even to spring at the walls like a frightened cat. Thrice he sprang, striving to climb to the coping, for the place had no roof, each time falling back, since it was too high for him to grasp. I caught him round the middle, and held him by main force, although he struck at me. "Be quiet," I said. "Do you want to kill yourself? You will be no good dead or maimed. Let me think." Meanwhile Japhet was acting on his own account, for he too had heard the tiny, ominous sounds given out by the telephone, and guessed their purport. First he ran to the massive transom that blocked the doorway and pushed. It was useless. Not even an elephant could have stirred it. Then he stepped back, examining it carefully. "I think it can be climbed, physician," he said. "Help me now." And he motioned to me to take one end of the heavy table on which the batteries stood. We dragged it to the doorway, and seeing his purpose, Oliver jumped on to it with him. Then, at Japhet's direction, while I supported the table to prevent its oversetting, Orme rested his forehead against the stone, making what schoolboys call a back, up which the mountaineer climbed actively until he stood upon his shoulders, and by stretching himself was able to grasp the end of the fallen transom. Next, while I held up the lamp to give him light, he gripped the roughnesses of the hewn stone with his toes, and in a few moments was upon the coping of the wall, 20 feet or more above the floor line. The rest was comparatively easy, for taking off his linen robe, Japhet knotted it once or twice, and let it down to us. By the help of this improvised rope, with Orme supporting me beneath, I too was dragged up to the coping of the wall. Then both of us pulled up Oliver, who, without a word, swung himself over the wall, hanging to Japhet's arms, and losing his hold, dropped to the ground on the farther side. Next came my turn. It was a long fall, and had not Oliver caught me, I think that I should have hurt myself. As it was, the breath was shaken out of me. Lastly, Japhet swung himself down, landing lightly as a cat. The lamps he had already dropped to us, and in another minute they were all lighted, and we were speeding down the great cavern. "Be careful," I cried. "There may be fallen rocks about." As it happened, I was right, for at that moment Oliver struck his legs against one of them and fell, cutting himself a good deal. In a moment he was up again, but after this our progress grew slow, for hundreds of tons of stone had been shaken from the roof and blocked the path. Also, whole buildings of the ancient and underground city had been thrown down, although these were mostly blown inward by the rush of air. At length we came to the end of the cave and halted dismayed, for here, where the blast of the explosion had been brought to a full stop, the place seemed to be crowded with rocks which it had rolled before it. "My God, I believe we are shut in!" exclaimed Oliver in despair. But Japhet, lantern in hand, was already leaping from block to block, and presently from the top of the debris called to us to come to him. "I think there is a road left, though a bad one, lords," he said, and pointed to a jagged, well-like hole blown out, as I believe, by the recoil of the blast. With difficulty and danger, for many of the piled-up stones were loose, we climbed down this place, and at its bottom squeezed ourselves through a narrow aperture onto the floor of the cave, praying that the huge door which led to the passage beyond might not be jammed, since if it were, as we knew well, our small strength would not avail to move it. Happily, this fear at least proved groundless, since it opened outward, and the force of the compressed air had torn it from its massive stone hinges and thrown it shattered to the ground. We scrambled over it and advanced down the passage, our revolvers in our hands. We reached the audience hall, which was empty and in darkness. We turned to the left, crossing various chambers, and in the last of them, through which one of the gates of the palace could be approached, met with the first signs of the tragedy, for there were bloodstains on the floor. Orme pointed to them as he hurried on, and suddenly a man leapt out of the darkness as a buck leaps from a bush, and ran past us, holding his hands to his side, where evidently he had some grievous hurt. Now we entered the corridor leading to the private apartments of the Child of Kings, and found ourselves walking on the bodies of dead and dying men. One of the former, I observed, as one does notice little things at such a moment, held in his hand the broken wire of the field telephone. I presume that he had snatched and severed it in his death pang at the moment when communication ceased between us and the palace. We rushed into the little antechamber in which lights were burning, and there saw a sight that I, for one, shall never forget. In the foreground lay more dead men, all of them wearing the livery of Prince Joshua. Beyond was Sergeant Quick, seated on a chair. He seemed to be literally hacked to pieces. An arrow that no one had attempted to remove was fast in his shoulder. His head, which Maqueda was sponging with wet cloths, well, I will not describe his wounds. Leaning against the wall near by stood Higgs, also bleeding, and apparently quite exhausted. Behind, besides Maqueda herself, were 2 or 3 of her ladies, wringing their hands and weeping. In face of this terrible spectacle, we came to a sudden halt. No word was spoken of by anyone, for the power of speech had left us. The dying Quick opened his eyes, lifted his hand, upon which there was a ghastly sword cut, to his forehead, as though to shade them from the light. Ah, how well I recall that pathetic motion! And from beneath this screen stared at us a while. Then he rose from the chair, touched his throat to show that he could not speak, as I suppose, saluted Orme, turned, and pointed to Maqueda, and with a triumphant smile sank down and died. Such was the noble end of Sergeant Quick. To describe what followed is not easy, for the scene was confused. Also, shock and sorrow have blurred its recollection in my mind. I remember Maqueda and Orme falling into each other's arms before everybody. I remember her drawing herself up in that imperial way of hers, and saying, as she pointed to the body of Quick, "There lies one who has shown us how to die. This countryman of yours was a hero, O Oliver, and you should hold his memory in honour, since he saved me from worse than death." "What's the story?" asked Orme of Higgs. "A simple one enough," he answered. "We got here all right, as we told you over the wire. Then Maqueda talked to you for a long while, until you rang off, saying you wanted to speak to Japhet. After that, at 10 o'clock precisely, we heard the thud of the explosion. Next, as we were preparing to go out to see what had happened, Joshua arrived alone, announcing that the idol Harmac had been destroyed, and demanded that the Child of Kings, for state reasons, should accompany him to his own castle. She declined, and, as he insisted, I took it upon myself to kick him out of the place. He retired, and we saw no more of him, but a few minutes later there came a shower of arrows down the passage, and after them a rush of men, who called, 'Death to the Gentiles! Rescue the Rose!' So we began to shoot and knocked over a lot of them, but Quick got that arrow through his shoulder. 3 times they came on like that, and 3 times we drove them back. At last our cartridges ran low, and we had only our revolvers left, which we emptied into them. They hung a moment, but moved forward again, and all seemed up. Then Quick went mad. He snatched the sword of a dead Abati and ran at them, roaring like a bull. They hacked and cut at him, but the end of it was that he drove them right out of the passage, while I followed, firing past him. Well, those who were left of the blackguards bolted, and when they had gone, the sergeant tumbled down. The women and I carried him back here, but he never said another word, and at last you turned up. Now he's gone, God rest him, for if ever there was a hero in this world, he was christened Samuel Quick." And turning aside, the professor pushed up the blue spectacles he always wore onto his forehead, and wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. With grief more bitter than I can describe, we lifted up the body of the gallant Quick, and bearing it into Maqueda's private apartment, placed it on her own bed. For she insisted that the man who had died to protect her should be laid nowhere else. It was strange to see the grim old soldier, whose face, now that I had washed his wounds, looked calm and even beautiful, laid out to sleep his last sleep upon the couch of the Child of Kings. That bed, I remember, was a rich and splendid thing, made up of some black wood, inlaid with scrolls of gold, and having hung about it curtains of white net embroidered with golden stars, such as Maqueda wore upon her official veil. There upon the scented pillows and silken coverlet we set our burden down, the work-worn hands clasped upon the breast in an attitude of prayer, and one by one bid our farewell to this faithful and upright man, whose face, as it chanced, we were never to see again, except in the glass of memory. Well, he had died as he had lived and would have wished to die, doing his duty and in war. And so we left him. Peace be to his honored spirit. In the blood-stained anteroom, while I dressed and stitched up the professor's wounds, a sword cut on the head, an arrow graze along the face, and a spear prick in the thigh, none of them, happily, at all deep or dangerous, we held a brief council. "Friends," said Maqueda, who was leaning on her lover's arm, "it is not safe that we should stop here. My uncle's plot has failed for the moment, but it was only a small and secret thing. I think that soon he will return again with 1,000 at his back, and then—" "What is in your mind?" asked Oliver. "To fly from Mur?" "How can we fly," she answered, "when the pass is guarded by Joshua's men, and the Fung wait for us without? The Abati hate you, my friends, and now that you have done your work, I think that they will kill you if they can, whom they bore with only till it was done. Alas, alas, that I should have brought you to this false and ungrateful country," and she began to weep while we stared at each other helpless. Then Japhet, who all this while had been crouched on the floor, rocking himself to and fro, and mourning in his Eastern fashion for Quick, whom he had loved, rose, and coming to the Child of Kings, prostrated himself before her. "O Walda Nagasta," he said, "hear the words of your servant. Only 3 miles away, near to the mouth of the pass, are encamped 500 men of my own people, the mountaineers, who hate Prince Joshua and his following. Fly to them, O Walda Nagasta, for they will cleave to you and listen to me, whom you have made a chief among them. Afterwards you can act as may seem wisest." Maqueda looked at Oliver questioningly. "I think that is good advice," he said. "At any rate, we can't be worse off among the mountaineers than we are in this undefended place. Tell your women to bring cloaks that we can throw over our heads, and let us go." 5 minutes later, a forlorn group filled with fears, we had stolen over the dead and dying in the passage, and made our way to the side gate of the palace that we found open, and over the bridge that spanned the moat beyond, which was down. Doubtless Joshua's ruffians had used it in their approach and retreat. Disguised in the long cloaks with monk-like hoods that the Abati wore at night, or when the weather was cold and wet, we hurried across the great square. Here, since we could not escape them, we mingled with the crowd that was gathered at its furthest end, and all of them, men, women, and children, chattering like monkeys in the tree-tops, and pointing to the cliff at the back of the palace, beneath which, it will be remembered, lay the underground city. A band of soldiers rode by, thrusting their way through the people, and in order to avoid them, we thought it wise to take refuge in the shadow of a walk of green-leaved trees which grew close at hand, for we feared lest they might recognize Oliver by his height. Here we turned and looked up at the cliff to discover what it was at which everyone was staring. At that moment, the full moon, which had been obscured by a cloud, broke out, and we saw a spectacle that under the circumstances was nothing less than terrifying. The cliff behind the palace rose to a height of about 150 feet, and, as it chanced, just there a portion of it jutted out in an oblong shape, which the Abati called the Lion Rock, although personally heretofore I had never been able to see it in any great resemblance to a lion. Now, however, it was different, for on the very extremity of this rock, staring down at Mur, sat the head and neck of the huge lion-faced idol of the Fung. Indeed, in that light, with the promontory stretching away behind it, it looked as though it were the idol itself, moving from the valley upon the farther side of the precipice to the top of the cliff above. "Oh, oh, oh!" groaned Japhet. "The prophecy is fulfilled. The head of Harmac has come to sleep at Mur." "You mean that we have sent him there," whispered Higgs. "Don't be frightened, man. Can't you understand that the power of our medicine has blown the head off the sphinx high into the air, and landed it where it sits now?" "Yes," I put in, "and what we felt in the cave was the shock of its fall." "I don't care what brought him," replied Japhet, who seemed quite unstrung by all that he had gone through. "All I know is that the prophecy is fulfilled, and Harmac has come to Mur, and where Harmac goes the Fung follow." "So much the better," said the irreverent Higgs. "I may be able to sketch and measure him now." But I saw that Maqueda was trembling, for she too thought this occurrence a very bad omen, and even Oliver remained silent, perhaps because he feared its effect upon the Abati. Nor was this wonderful, since, from the talk around us, clearly that effect was great. Evidently the people were terrified, like Japhet. We could hear them foreboding ill, and cursing us Gentiles as wizards, who had not destroyed the idol of the Fung as we promised, but had only caused him to fly to Mur. Here I may mention that as a matter of fact they were right. As we discovered afterwards, the whole force of the explosion, instead of shattering the vast bulk of the stone image, had rushed up through the hollow chambers in its interior until it struck against the solid head. Lifting this as though it were a toy, the expanding gas had hurled that mighty mass an unknown distance into the air, to light upon the crest of the cliffs of Mur, where probably it will remain forever. "Well," I said, when we had stared a little while at this extraordinary phenomenon, "thank God it did not travel further, and fall upon the palace." "Oh, had it done so," whispered Maqueda in a tearful voice, "I think you might have thanked God indeed, for then at least I should be free from all my troubles. Come, friends, let us be going before we are discovered." End of chapter 16. Chapter 17 of Queen Sheba's Ring. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by deongines, Salt Lake City, Utah. Queen Sheba's Ring by H. Rider Haggard. Chapter 17. I Find My Son. Our road toward the pass ran through the camping ground of the newly created Abati army, and what we saw on our journey thither told us more vividly than any words or reports could do how utter was the demoralization of that people. Where should have been sentries were no sentries. Where should have been soldiers were groups of officers talking with women. Where should have been officers were camp followers drinking. Through this confusion and excitement we made our way unobserved, or at any rate unquestioned, till at length we came to the regiment of the mountaineers, who for the most part were goat-herds, poor people who lived upon the slopes of the precipices that enclosed the land of Mur. These folk, having little to do with their more prosperous brethren of the plain, were hardy and primitive of nature, and therefore retained some of the primeval virtues of mankind, such as courage and loyalty. It was for the first of these reasons, and indeed for the second also, that they had been posted by Joshua at the mouth of the pass, which he knew well they alone could be trusted to defend in the event of serious attack. Moreover, it was desirable, from his point of view, to keep them out of the way while he developed his plans against the person of the child of kings, for whom these simple-minded men had a hereditary and almost a superstitious reverence. As soon as we were within the lines of these mountaineers, we found the difference between them and the rest of the Abati. The other regiments we had passed unchallenged, but here we were instantly stopped by a picket. Japhet whispered something into the ear of its officer that caused him to stare hard at us. Then this officer saluted the veiled figure of the child of kings and led us to where the commander of the band and his subordinates were seated near a fire, sitting together. At some sign or word that did not reach us, the commander, an old fellow with a long grey beard, rose and said, "Your pardon, but be pleased to show your faces." Maqueda threw back her hood and turned so that the light of the moon fell full upon her, whereon the old man dropped to his knee, saying, "Your commands, O Walda Nagasta." "Summon your regiment, and I will give them," she answered, and seated herself on a bench by the fire, we three and Japhet standing behind her. The commander issued orders to his captains, and presently the mountaineers formed up on three sides of a square above us, to the number of a little over 500 men. When all were gathered, Maqueda mounted the bench upon which she had been sitting, threw back her hood so that every one could see her face in the light of the fire, and addressed them. "Men of the mountain side, this night, just after the idol of the Fung had been destroyed, the Prince Joshua, my uncle, came to me demanding my surrender to him, whether to kill me or to imprison me in his castle beyond the end of the lake, for reasons of state, as he said, or for other vile purposes, I do not know." At these words a murmur rose from the audience. "Wait," said Maqueda, holding up her hand, "there is worse to come. I told my uncle, Prince Joshua, that he was a traitor and had best be gone. He went, threatening me, and, when I do not know, withdrew the guards that should be stationed at my palace gates. Now, some rumour of my danger had reached the foreigners in my service, and two of them, he who is called Black Windows, whom we rescued from the Fung, and the soldier named Quick, came to watch over me, while the Lord Orme and the Dr. Adams stayed in the cave to send out that spark of fire which should destroy the idol. Nor did they come back without need, for presently arrived a band of Prince Joshua's men to take me. Then Black Windows and the soldier his companion fought a good fight, they two holding the narrow passage against many, and slaying a number of them with their terrible weapons. The end of it was, men of the mountains, that the warrior Quick, charging down the passage, drove away those servants of Joshua, who remained alive, but in so doing he was wounded to the death. Yes, that brave man lies dead, having given his life to save the child of kings from the hands of her own people. Black Windows was also wounded. See the bandages about his head. Then came the Lord Orme and the Dr. Adams, and with them your brother Japhet, who had barely escaped with their lives from the cave city, and knowing that I was no longer safe in the palace, where even my sleeping room has been drenched with blood, with them I have fled to you for succour. Will you not protect me, O men of the mountainside?" "Yes, yes," they answered with a great shout. "Command, we obey. What shall we do, O child of kings?" Now Maqueda called the officers of the regiment apart and consulted with them, asking their opinions one by one. Some of them were in favour of finding out where Joshua might be, and attacking him at once. "Crush the snake's head, and its tail will soon cease wriggling," these said, and I confess this was a view that in many ways commended itself to us. But Maqueda would have none of it. "What!" she exclaimed. "Shall I begin a civil war among my people, when for aught I know the enemy is at our gates?" adding aside to us, "Also, how can these few hundred men, brave though they be, hope to stand against the thousands under the command of Joshua?" "What then would you do?" asked Orme. "Return to the palace with these mountaineers, O Oliver, and by help of that garrison hold it against all enemies." "Very well," he replied. "To those who are quite lost, one road is as good as another. They must trust to the stars to guide them." "Quite so," echoed Higgs, "and the sooner we go the better, for my leg hurts and I want a sleep." So Maqueda gave her commands to the officers, by whom they were conveyed to the regiment, which received them with a shout, and instantly began to strike its camp. Then it was, coming hot foot after so much sorrow, loss, and doubt, that there followed the happiest event of all my life. Utterly tired out and very despondent, I was seated on an arrow chest awaiting the order to march, idly watching Oliver and Maqueda talking with great earnestness at a little distance, and in the intervals trying to prevent poor Higgs at my side from falling asleep. While I was thus engaged, suddenly I heard a disturbance, and by the bright moonlight caught sight of a man being led into the camp in charge of a guard of Abati soldiers, whom from their dress I knew to belong to a company that just then was employed in watching the lower gates of the pass. I took no particular heed of the incident, thinking only that they might have captured some spy, till a murmur of astonishment and the general stir warned me that something unusual had occurred. So I rose from my box and strolled towards the man, who was now hidden from me by a group of mountaineers. As I advanced, this group opened, the men who composed it bowing to me with a kind of wondering respect that impressed me, I did not know why. Then for the first time I saw the prisoner. He was a tall, athletic young man, dressed in festal robes, with a heavy gold chain about his neck, and I wondered vaguely what such a person should be doing here in this time of national commotion. He turned his head so that the moonlight showed his dark eyes, his somewhat oval-shaped face ending in a peaked black beard, and his finely cut features. In an instant I knew him. It was my son, Roderick. Next moment, for the first time for very many years, he was in my arms. The first thing that I remember saying to him was a typically Anglo-Saxon remark, for however much we live in the East or elsewhere, we never really shake off our native conventions and habits of speech. It was, "How are you, my boy, and how on earth did you come here?" To which he answered, slowly, it is true, and speaking with a foreign accent, "All right, thank you, father. I ran upon my legs." By this time Higgs hobbled up, and was greeting my son warmly, for of course they were old friends. "Thought you were to be married tonight, Roderick?" he said. "Yes, yes," he answered, "I am half married according to Fung custom, which counts not to my soul. Look, this is the dress of marriage," and he pointed to his fine embroidered robe and rich ornaments. "Then where's your wife?" answered Higgs. "I do not know, and I do not care," he answered, "for I did not like that wife. Also, it is all nothing, as I am not quite married to her. Fung marriage between big people takes 2 days to finish, and if not finished, does not matter. So she marries someone else if she like, and I too." "What happened then?" I asked. "Oh, this, father. When we had eaten the marriage feast, but before we passed before priest, suddenly we hear a thunder, and see a pillar of fire shoot up into sky, and sitting on top of it, head of Harmac, which vanish into heaven, and stop there. Then everybody jump up and say, Magic of the white man! Magic of white man! White man kill the god who sit there from beginning of world. Now day of Fung finished according to prophecy. Run away, people of Fung, run away. Barang the Sultan tear his clothes too, and say, Run away, Fung. And my half-wife, she tear her clothes and say nothing, but run like antelope. So they all run toward east, where great river is, and leave me alone. Then I get up and run too, toward west, for I know from black windows, and he pointed to Higgs, when we shut up together in belly of God, before he let down 2 lions, what all this game mean, and therefore not frightened. Well, I run, meeting no one in night, till I come to pass, run up it and find guards, to whom I tell story, so they not kill me, but let me through. And at last I come here, quite safe, without Fung wife, thank God, and that end of tale. I am afraid you are wrong there, my boy, I said. Out of the frying pan into the fire, that's all. Out of frying pan into fire, he repeated. Not understand. Father must remember I only little fellow when Khalifa's people take me, and since then speak no English till I meet Black Windows. Only he give me Bible book that he have in pocket when he go down to be eat by lions. Here Higgs blushed, for no one ever suspected him, a severe critic of all religions, of carrying a Bible in his pocket, and muttered something about ancient customs of the Hebrews. Well, went on Roderick, read that book ever since, and as you see, all my English come back. The question is, said Higgs, evidently in haste to talk of something else, will the Fung come back? Oh, Black Windows, don't know, can't say, think not. Their prophecy was that Harmac moved to Mur, but when they see his head jump into sky and stop there, they run every man toward the sunrise, and I think go on running. But Harmac has come to Mur, Roderick, I said. At least his head has fallen onto the cliff that overlooks the city. Oh, my father, he answered, then that make great difference. When Fung find out that head of Harmac has come here, no doubt they come after him, for head his most holy bit, especially as they want hang all the Abati whom they not like. Well, let's hope that they don't find out anything about it, I replied, to change the subject. Then, taking Roderick by the hand, I led him to where Maqueda stood, a yard or 2 apart, listening to our talk, but of course understanding very little of it, and introduced him to her, explaining in a few words the wonderful thing that had happened. She welcomed him very kindly, and congratulated me upon my son's escape. Meanwhile, Roderick had been staring at her with evident admiration. Now he turned to us and said in his quaint, broken English, Walda Nagasta, most lovely woman, no wonder King Solomon love her mother. If Barang's daughter, my wife, had been like her, think I run through great river into rising sun with Fung. Oliver instantly translated this remark, which made us all laugh, including Maqueda herself, and very grateful we were to find the opportunity for a little innocent merriment upon that tragic night. By this time the regiment was ready to start, and had formed up into companies. Before the march actually began, however, the officer of the Abati patrol, in whose charge Roderick had been brought to us, demanded his surrender, that he might deliver his prisoner to the commander-in-chief, Prince Joshua. Of course this was refused, whereon the man asked roughly, by whose order? As it happened, Maqueda, of whose presence he was not aware, heard him, and acting on some impulse, came forward and unveiled. By mine, she said. Know that the child of kings rules the Abati, not the Prince Joshua, and that prisoners taken by her soldiers are hers, not his. Begone, back to your post." The captain stared, saluted, and went with his companions, not to the pass, indeed, as he had been ordered, but to Joshua. To him he reported the arrival of the Gentile's son, and the news he brought that the nation of the Fung, dismayed by the destruction of their god, were in full flight from the plains of Harmac, proposing to cross the great river and to return no more. This glad tidings spread like wildfire, so fast indeed that almost before we had begun our march we heard the shouts of exultation with which it was received by the terrified mob gathered in the great square. The cloud of terror was suddenly lifted from them. They went mad in their delight. They lit bonfires, they drank, they feasted, they embraced each other, and boasted of their bravery that had caused the mighty nation of the Fung to flee away for ever. Meanwhile our advance had begun, nor in the midst of the general jubilation was any particular notice taken of us till we were in the middle of the square of Mur, and within half a mile of the palace, when we saw by the moonlight that a large body of troops, 2,000 or 3,000 of them, were drawn up in front of us, apparently to bar our way. Still we went on till a number of officers rode up, and addressing the commander of the regiment of mountaineers, demanded to know why he had left his post, and whither he went. "I go whither I am ordered," he answered, "for there is one here greater than I. If you mean the Gentile Orme and his fellows, the command of the Prince Joshua is that you hand them over to us, that they may make report to him of their doings this night." "And the command of the Child of Kings is," replied the captain of the mountaineers, "that I take them with her back to the palace." "It has no weight," said the spokesman insolently, "not being endorsed by the council. Surrender the Gentiles. Hand over to us the person of the Child of Kings, of whom you have taken possession, and return to your post till the pleasure of the Prince Joshua be known." Then the wrath of Maqueda blazed up. "Seize those men," she said, and it was done instantly. "Now cut the head from him who dared to demand the surrender of my person and of my officers, and give it to his companions to take back to the Prince Joshua as my answer to his message." The man heard, and being a coward like all the Abati, flung himself down upon his face before Maqueda, trying to kiss her robe and pleading for mercy. "Dog," she answered, "you were one of those who this very night dared to attack my chamber. Oh, lie not! I knew your voice and heard your fellow traitors call you by your name. Away with him!" We tried to interfere, but she would not listen, even to Orme. "Would you plead for your brother's murderer?" she asked, alluding to Quick. "I have spoken." So they dragged him off behind us, and presently we saw a melancholy procession returning whence they came, carrying something on a shield. It reached the opposing ranks, whence there arose a murmur of wrath and fear. "March on," said Maqueda, "and gain the palace." So the regiment formed into a square, and setting Maqueda and ourselves in the centre of it, advanced again. Then the fight began. Great numbers of the Abati surrounded us, and as they did not dare to make a direct attack, commenced shooting arrows, which killed and wounded a number of men. But the Highlanders also were archers, and carried stronger bows. The square was halted, the first ranks kneeling and the second standing behind them. Then, at a given word, the stiff bows which these hardy people used against the lion and the buffalo upon their hills were drawn to the ear and loosed again and again with terrible effect. On that open place it was almost impossible to miss the mobs of the Abati who, having no experience of war, were fighting without order. Nor could the light mail they wore withstand the rush of the heavy barbed arrows which pierced them through and through. In 2 minutes they began to give. In 3 they were flying back to their main body, those who were left of them a huddled rout of men and horses. So the French must have fled before the terrible longbows of the English at Crécy and Poitiers, for in fact we were taking part in just such a medieval battle. Oliver, who was watching intently, went to Japhet and whispered something in his ear. He nodded and ran to seek the commander of the regiment. Presently the result of that whisper became apparent, for the sides of the hollow square wheeled outward, and the rear moved up to strengthen the centre. Now the mountaineers were ranged in a double or triple line, behind which were only about a dozen soldiers, who marched round Maqueda, holding their shields aloft in order to protect her from stray arrows. With these too came our four selves, a number of camp followers and others, carrying on their shields those of the regiment who were too badly wounded to walk. Leaving the dead where they lay, we began to advance, pouring in volleys of arrows as we went. Twice the Abati tried to charge us, and twice those dreadful arrows drove them back. Then, at the word of command, the Highlanders slung their bows upon their backs, drew their short swords, and in their turn charged. 5 minutes afterwards everything was over. Joshua's soldiers threw down their arms and ran or galloped to right and left, save a number of them who fled through the gates of the palace, which they had opened, and across the drawbridge into the courtyards within. After them, or rather mixed up with them, followed the mountaineers, killing all whom they could find, for they were out of hand and would not listen to the commands of Maqueda and their officers, that they should show mercy. So just as the dawn broke, this strange moonlit battle ended, a small affair, it is true, for there were only 500 men engaged upon our side, and 3,000 or 4,000 on the other, yet one that cost a great number of lives, and was the beginning of all the ruin that followed. Well, we were safe for a while, since it was certain, after the lesson which he had just learned, that Joshua would not attempt to storm the double walls and fosse of the palace without long preparation. Yet even now a new trouble awaited us, for by some means, we never discovered how, that wing of the palace in which Maqueda's private rooms were situated suddenly burst into flames. Personally, I think that the fire arose through the fact that a lamp had been left burning near the bed of the Child of Kings, upon which was laid the body of Sergeant Quick. Perhaps a wounded man, hidden there, overturned the lamp. Perhaps the draught blowing through the open doors brought the gold-spangled curtains into contact with the wick. At any rate, the wood-panelled chambers took fire, and had it not happened that the set of the wind was favourable, the whole palace might have been consumed. As it was, we succeeded in confining the conflagration to this particular part of it, which within 2 hours had burnt out, leaving nothing standing but the stark stone walls. Such was the funeral pyre of Sergeant Quick, a noble one, I thought to myself, as I watched it burn. When the fire was so well under control, for we had pulled down the connecting passage where Higgs and Quick fought their great fight, that there was no longer any danger of its spreading, and the watches had been set, at length we got some rest. Maqueda and 2 or 3 of her ladies, one of them, I remember, her old nurse who had brought her up, for her mother died at her birth, took possession of some empty rooms, of which there were many in the palace, while we lay, or rather fell, down in the guest chambers where we had always slept, and never opened our eyes again until the evening. I remember that I woke thinking that I was the victim of some wonderful dream of mingled joy and tragedy. Oliver and Higgs were sleeping like logs, but my son Roderick, still dressed in his bridal robes, had risen and sat by my bed staring at me, a puzzled look upon his handsome face. "So you are here," I said, taking his hand. "I thought I dreamed." "No, father," he answered in his odd English, "no dream, all true. This is a strange world, father. Look at me, for how many years, 12, 14, slave of savage peoples, for whom I sing, priest of Fung idol, always near death, but never die. Then Sultan Barang take fancy to me, say I come of white blood, and must be his daughter's husband. Then your brother Higgs made prisoner with me, and tell me that you hunt me all these years. Then Higgs thrown to lions, and you save him. Then yesterday I married to Sultan's daughter, whom I never see before but twice at fast of idol. Then Harmac's head fly off to heaven, and all Fung people run away. And I run too, and find you. Then battle, and many killed, and arrows scratch my neck, but not hurt me." And he pointed to a graze just over his jugular vein. "And now we together. Oh, father, very strange world. I think there gods somewhere who look after us." "I think so too, my boy," I answered, "and I hope that he will continue to do so, for I tell you we are in a worse place than ever you were among the Fung." "Oh, don't mind that, father," he answered gaily, for Roderick is a cheerful soul. "As Fung say, there no house without door, although plenty people made blind and can't see it. But we not blind, or we dead long ago. Find door by and by. But here come man to talk to you." The man proved to be Japhet, who had been sent by the Child of Kings to summon us, as she had news to tell. So I woke the others, and after I had dressed the professor's flesh wounds, which were stiff and sore, we joined her where she sat in the gateway tower of the inner wall. She greeted us rather sadly, asked Oliver how he had slept, and Higgs if his cuts hurt him. Then she turned to my son and congratulated him upon his wonderful escape, and upon having found a father if he had lost a wife. "Truly," she added, "you are a fortunate man to be so well loved, O son of Adams. To how many sons are given fathers who for 14 long years, abandoning all else, would search for them in peril of their lives, enduring slavery and blows and starvation, and the desert's heat and cold, for the sake of a long-lost face. Such faithfulness is that of my forefather David for his brother Jonathan, and such love it is that passes the love of women. See that you pay it back to him, and to his memory until the last hour of your life, child of Adams." "I will indeed, I will, O Walda Nagasta," answered Roderick, and throwing his arms about my neck, he embraced me before them all. It is not too much to say that this kiss of filial devotion more than repaid me for all I had undergone for his beloved sake. For now I knew that I had not toiled and suffered for one of no worth, as is so often the lot of true hearts in this bitter world. Just then some of Maqueda's ladies brought food, and at her bidding we breakfasted. "Be sparing," she said with a melancholy little laugh, "for I know not how long our store will last. Listen, I have received a last offer from my uncle Joshua. An arrow brought it, not a man. I think that no man would come, lest his fate should be that of the traitor of yesterday." And she produced a slip of parchment that had been tied to the shaft of an arrow, and unfolding it read as follows: "O Walda Nagasta, deliver up to death the Gentiles who have bewitched you and led you to shed the blood of so many of your people, and with them the officers of the mountaineers, and the rest shall be spared. You also I will forgive and make my wife. Resist, and all who cling to you shall be put to the sword, and to yourself I promise nothing." Written by order of the council. Joshua, Prince of the Abati. "What answer shall I send?" she asked, looking at us curiously. "Upon my word," replied Orme, shrugging his shoulders, "if it were not for those faithful officers, I am not sure that you would be wise to accept the terms. We are cooped up here, but a few, surrounded by thousands, who, if they dare not assault, still can starve us out, as this place is not victualled for a siege." "You forget one of those terms, O Oliver," she said slowly, pointing with her finger to the passage in the letter which stated that Joshua would make her his wife. "Now do you still counsel surrender?" "How can I?" he answered, flushing, and was silent. "Well, it does not matter what you counsel," she went on with a smile, "seeing that I have already sent my answer, also by arrow. See, here is a copy of it," and she read, "To my rebellious people of the Abati, surrender to me Joshua, my uncle, and the members of the council who had lifted sword against me, to be dealt with according to the ancient law, and the rest of you shall go unharmed. Refuse, and I swear to you that before the night of the new moon has passed, there shall be such woe in Mur as fell upon the city of David when the barbarian standards were set upon her walls. Such is the counsel that has come to me, the child of Solomon, in the watches of the night, and I tell you that it is true. Do what you will, people of the Abati, or what you must, since your fate and ours are written, but be sure that in me and the Western lords lies your only hope." Walda Nagasta. "What do you mean, O Maqueda," I asked, "about the counsel that came to you in the watches of the night?" "What I say, O Adams," she answered calmly. "After we parted at dawn I slept heavily, and in my sleep a dark and royal woman stood before me, whom I knew to be my great ancestress, the beloved of Solomon. She looked on me sadly, yet as I thought with love. Then she drew back, as it were, a curtain of thick cloud that hid the future, and revealed to me the young moon riding in the sky, and beneath it Mur, a blackened ruin, her streets filled with dead. Yes, and she showed to me other things, though I may not tell them, which also shall come to pass. Then held her hands over me as if in blessing, and was gone. Old Hebrew prophet business, very interesting," I heard Higgs mutter below his breath, while in my own heart I set the dream down to excitement and want of food. In fact, only two of us were impressed, my son very much, and Oliver a little, perhaps because everything Maqueda said was gospel to him. "Doubtless all will come to pass as you say, Walda Nagasta," said Roderick with conviction. "The day of the Abati is finished." "Why do you say that, son?" I asked. "Because, father, among the Fung people, from a child, I have two offices, that of singer to the god, and that of reader of dreams. Oh, do not laugh. I can tell you many that have come true as I read them. Thus the dream of Barung, which I read to mean that the head of Harmac would come to Mur, and see, there it sit." And turning, he pointed through the doorway of the tower to the grim lion head of the idol crouched upon the top of the precipice, watching Mur as a beast of prey watches the victim upon which it is about to spring. "I know when dreams true, and when dreams false. It my gift, like my voice. I know that this dream true, that all." And as he ceased speaking I saw his eyes catch Maqueda's, and a very curious glance pass between them. As for Orme, he only said, "You Easterns are strange people, and if you believe a thing, Maqueda, there may be something in it. But you understand that this message of yours means war to the last, a very unequal war," and he looked at the hordes of the Abati gathering on the great square. "Yes," she answered quietly, "I understand. But however sore our straits, and however strange may seem the things that happen, have no fear of the end of that war, O my friends." End of chapter 17. Chapter 18 of Queen Sheba's Ring. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by deongines, Salt Lake City, Utah. Queen Sheba's Ring by H. Rider Haggard. Chapter 18, The Burning of the Palace. Orme was right. Maqueda's defiance did mean war, an unequal war. This was our position. We were shut up in a long range of buildings, of which one end had been burned, that on account of their moat and double wall, if defended with any vigor, could only be stormed by an enemy of great courage and determination, prepared to face a heavy sacrifice of life. This was a circumstance in our favor, since the Abati were not courageous and very much disliked the idea of being killed or even injured. But here our advantage ended. Deducting those whom we had lost on the previous night, the garrison only amounted to something over 400 men, of whom about 50 were wounded, some of them dangerously. Moreover, ammunition was short, for they had shot away most of their arrows in the battle of the square, and we had no means of obtaining more. But worst of all, the palace was not provisioned for a siege, and the mountaineers had with them only 3 days' rations of sun-dried beef or goat's flesh, and a hard kind of biscuit made of Indian corn mixed with barley meal. Thus, as we saw from the beginning, unless we could manage to secure more food, our case must soon grow hopeless. There remained yet another danger. Although the palace itself was stone-built, its gilded domes and ornamental turrets were of timber, and therefore liable to be fired, as indeed had already happened. The roof was also of ancient cedar beams, thinly covered with concrete, while the interior, containing an enormous quantity of panels, or rather boarding, cut from some resinous wood. The Abati, on the other hand, were amply supplied with every kind of store and weapon, and could bring a great force to blockade us, though that force was composed of a timid and undisciplined rabble. Well, we made the best preparations that we could, although of these I did not see much, since all that day my time was occupied in attending to the wounded, with the help of my son and a few rough orderlies, whose experience in doctoring had for the most part been confined to cattle. A pitiful business it proved without the aid of anesthetics or a proper supply of bandages and other appliances. Although my medicine chest had been furnished upon a liberal scale, it proved totally inadequate to the casualties of battle. Still, I did my best and saved some lives, though many cases developed gangrene and slipped through my fingers. Meanwhile, Higgs, who worked nobly, notwithstanding his flesh wounds, which pained him considerably, and Orme were also doing their best with the assistance of Japhet and the other officers of the Highland regiment. The palace was thoroughly examined, and all weak places in its defences were made good. The available force was divided into watches and stationed to the best advantage. A number of men were set to work to manufacture arrow shafts from cedar beams, of which there were plenty in the wooden stables and outhouses that lay at the back of the main building, and to point and wing the same from a supply of iron barbs and feathers, which fortunately was discovered in one of the guardhouses. A few horses that remained in a shed were killed and salted down for food, and so forth. Also, every possible preparation was made to repel attempts to storm, paving stones being piled up to throw upon the heads of assailants, and fires lighted on the walls to heat pitch and oil and water for the same purpose. But to our disappointment no direct assault was delivered, such desperate methods not commending themselves to the Abati. Their plan of attack was to take cover wherever they could, especially among the trees of the garden beyond the gates, and thence shoot arrows at any one who appeared upon the walls, or even fire them in volleys at the clouds, as the Normans did at Hastings, so that they might fall upon the heads of persons in the courtyards. Although these cautious tactics cost us several men, they had the advantage of furnishing us with a supply of ammunition which we sorely needed. All the spent arrows were carefully collected and made use of against the enemy, at whom we shot whenever opportunity offered. We did them but little damage, however, since they were extremely careful not to expose themselves. In this fashion 3 dreary days went past, unrelieved by any incident except a feint, for it was scarcely more, which the Abati made upon the second night, apparently with the object of forcing the great gates under cover of a rainstorm. The advance was discovered at once, and repelled by 2 or 3 volleys of arrows and some rifle shots. Of these rifles, indeed, whereof we possessed about a score, the Abati were terribly afraid. Picking out some of the most intelligent soldiers, we taught them how to handle our spare guns, and though, of course, their shooting was extremely erratic, the result of it, backed up by our own accurate marksmanship, was to force the enemy to take cover. Indeed, after 1 or 2 experiences of the effect of bullets, not a man would show himself in the open within 500 yards until night had fallen. On the 3rd afternoon we held a council to determine what must be done, since for the last 24 hours it had been obvious that things could not continue as they were. To begin with, we had only sufficient food left to keep our force from starvation for 2 more days. Also the spirits of our soldiers, brave men enough when actual fighting was concerned, were beginning to flag in this atmosphere of inaction. Gathered into groups, they talked of their wives and children, and of what would happen to them at the hands of Joshua. Also of their cattle and crops, saying that doubtless these were being ravaged and their houses burned. In vain did Maqueda promise them 5-fold their loss when the war was ended, for evidently in their hearts they thought it could only end one way. Moreover, as they pointed out, she could not give them back their children if these were killed. At this melancholy council every possible plan was discussed, to find that these resolved themselves into 2 alternatives: to surrender, or take the bull by the horns, sally out of the palace at night, and attack Joshua. On the face of it, this latter scheme had the appearance of suicide, but in fact it was not so desperate as it seemed. The Abati being such cowards, it was quite probable that they would run in their thousands before the onset of a few hundred determined men, and that, if once victory declared itself for the Child of Kings, the bulk of her subjects would return to their allegiance. So we settled on it in preference to surrender, which we knew meant death to ourselves, and for Maqueda a choice between that last grim solution of her troubles and a forced marriage. But there were others to be convinced, namely the mountaineers. Japhet, who had been present at the council, was sent to summon all of them, except those actually on guard, and when they were assembled in the large inner court, Maqueda went out and addressed them. I do not remember the exact words of her speech, and I made no note of them, but it was extremely beautiful and touching. She pointed out her plight, and that we could halt no longer between 2 opinions, who must either fight or yield. For herself, she said she did not care, since, although she was young and their ruler, she set no store upon her life, and would give it up gladly rather than be driven into a marriage which she considered shameful, and forced to pass beneath the yoke of traitors. But for us foreigners she did care. We had come to her country at her invitation. We had served her nobly. One of us had given his life to protect her person. And now, in violation of her safeguard and that of the council, we were threatened with a dreadful death. Were they, her subjects, so lacking in honour and hospitality that they would suffer such a thing, with no blow struck to save us? Now the majority of them shouted no, but some were silent, and one old captain advanced, saluted, and spoke. "Child of kings," he said, "let us search out the truth of this matter. Is it not because of your love of the foreign soldier, Orme, that all this trouble has arisen? Is not that love unlawful according to our law, and are you not solemnly affianced to the Prince Joshua?" Maqueda considered a while before she replied, and said slowly, "Friend, my heart is my own. Therefore upon this point answer your question for yourself. As regards my uncle Joshua, if there existed any abiding contract between us, it was broken when a few nights ago he sent his servants armed to attack and drag me off, I know not whither. Would you have me marry a traitor and a coward?" "I have spoken." "No," again shouted the majority of the soldiers. Then in the silence that followed, the old captain replied, with a canniness that was almost Scotch, "On the point raised by you, O child of kings, I give no opinion, since you, being but a woman, if a high-born one, would not listen to me if I did, but will doubtless follow that heart of yours, of which you speak to whatever end is appointed. Settle the matter with your betrothed Joshua as you will, but we also have a matter to settle with Joshua, who is a toad with a long tongue, that if he seems slow, yet never misses his fly. We took up your cause, and have killed a great number of his people, as he has killed some of ours. This he will not forget. Therefore it seems to me that it will be wise that we should make what we can of the nest that we have built, since it is better to die in battle than on the gallows. For this reason, then, since we can stay here no longer, for my part I am willing to go out and fight for you this night, although Joshua's people being so many and ours so few, I shall think myself fortunate if I live to see another sun." This hard and reasoned speech seemed to appeal to the dissentients, with the result that they withdrew their opposition, and it was agreed that we should attempt to break our way through the besieging army about 1 hour before the dawn, when they would be heavily asleep and most liable to panic. Yet, as it chanced, that sortie was destined never to take place, which perhaps was fortunate for us, since I am convinced that it would have ended in failure. It is true that we might have forced our way through Joshua's army, but afterwards those of us who remained alive would have been surrounded, starved out, and when our strength and ammunition were exhausted, taken prisoners or cut down. However that may be, events shaped a different course for us, perhaps because the Abati got wind of our intention, and had no stomach for a pitched battle with desperate men. As it happened, this night from sunset on to moonrise was one of a darkness so remarkable that it was impossible to see anything even a foot away. Also, a wind blowing from the east made sounds very inaudible. Only a few of our men were on guard, since it was necessary that they should be rested till it was time for them to prepare for their great effort. Also, we had little fear of any direct attack. About 8 o'clock, however, my son Roderick, one of the watch stationed in the gateway towers, who was gifted with very quick ears, reported that he thought he heard people moving on the farther side of the massive wooden doors beyond the moat. Accordingly, some of us went to listen, but could distinguish nothing, and concluded therefore that he was mistaken. So we retired to our posts and waited patiently for the moon to rise. But as it chanced, no moon rose, or rather we could not see her, because the sky was completely covered by thick banks of thunder clouds, presaging the break-up of a period of great heat. These, as the wind had now died down, remained quite stationary upon the face of the sky, blotting out all light. Perhaps another hour had passed when, chancing to look behind me, I saw what I thought was a meteor falling from the crest of the cliff against which the palace was built, that cliff whither the head of the idol Harmac had been carried by the force of the explosion. "Look at that shooting star," I said to Oliver, who was at my side. "It is not a shooting star, it is fire," he replied in a startled voice, and as he spoke, other streaks of light, scores of them, began to rain down from the brow of the cliff and land upon the wooden buildings to the rear of the palace that were dry as tinder with the drought, and, what was worse, upon the gilded timber domes of the roof. "Don't you understand the game?" he went on. "They have tied firebrands to arrows and spears to burn us out. Sound the alarm! Sound the alarm!" It was done, and presently the great range of buildings began to hum like a hive of bees. The soldiers, still half asleep, rushed hither and thither shouting. The officers also, developing the characteristic excitement of the Abati race in this hour of panic, yelled and screamed at them, beating them with their fists and swords till some kind of control was established. Then attempts were made to extinguish the flames, which by this time had got hold in half a dozen places. From the beginning the effort was absolutely hopeless. It is true that there was plenty of water in the moat, which was fed by a perennial stream that flowed down the face of the precipice behind. But pumping engines of any sort were quite unknown to the Abati, who, if a building took fire, just let it burn, contenting themselves with safeguarding those in its neighbourhood. Moreover, even in the palace, such articles as pails, jugs, or other vessels were comparatively few and far between. Those that we could find, however, were filled with water and passed by lines of men to the places in most danger, that is, practically everywhere, while other men tried to cut off the advance of the flames by pulling down portions of the building. But as fast as one fire was extinguished, others broke out, for the rain of burning darts and of lighted pots or lamps filled with oil descended continuously from the cliff above. A strange and terrible sight it was to see them flashing down through the darkness like the fiery darts that shall destroy the wicked city in the day of Armageddon. Still we toiled on despairingly. On the roof we 4 white men and some soldiers under the command of Japhet were pouring water onto several of the gilded domes, which now were well alight. Close by, wrapped in a dark cloak, and attended by some of her ladies, stood Maqueda. She was quite calm, although sundry burning arrows and spears, falling with great force from the cliff above, struck the flat roofs close to where she stood. Her ladies, however, were not calm. They wept and wrung their hands, while one of them went into violent hysterics in her very natural terror. Maqueda turned and bade them descend to the courtyard of the gateway, where she said she would join them presently. They rushed off, rejoicing to escape the sight of those burning arrows, one of which had just pierced a man and set his clothes and hair on fire, causing him to leap from the roof in his madness. At Oliver's request, I ran to the Child of Kings to lead her to some safer place, if it could be found, but she would not stir. "Let me be, O Adams," she said. "If I am to die, I will die here. But I do not think that is fated." And with her foot she kicked aside a burning spear that had struck the cement roof, and rebounding, fallen quite close to her. If my people will not fight," she went on with bitter sarcasm, "at least they understand the other arts of war, for this trick of theirs is clever. They are cruel also. Listen to them mocking us in the square. They ask whether we will roast alive or come out and have our throats cut. Oh," she went on, clenching her hands, "oh, that I should have been born the head of such an accursed race. Let Sheol take them all, for in the day of their tribulation no finger will I lift to save them." She was silent for a moment, and down below, near the gateway, I heard some brute screaming, "Pretty pigeons, are your feathers singeing? Come then into our pie, pretty pigeons, followed by shouts of ribald laughter. But it chanced it was this hound himself who went into the pie. Presently, when the flames were brighter, I saw him, in the midst of a crowd of his admirers, singing his foul song, another verse of it about Maqueda, which I will not repeat, and by good fortune managed to put a bullet through his head. It was not a bad shot, considering the light and circumstances, and the only one I fired that night. I trust also that it will be the last I shall ever fire at any human being. Just as I was about to leave Maqueda and return with her message to Orme, to the effect that she would not move, the final catastrophe occurred. Amongst the stables was a large shed filled with dry fodder for the palace horses and camels. Suddenly this burst into a mass of flame that spread in all directions. Then came the last hideous panic. From every part of the palace the mountaineers, men and officers together, rushed down to the gateway. In a minute, with the single exception of Japhet, we four and Maqueda were left alone upon the roof, where we stood overwhelmed, not knowing what to do. We heard the drawbridge fall. We heard the great doors burst upon beneath the pressure of a mob of men. We heard a coarse voice, I thought it was that of Joshua, yell, "Kill whom you will, my children, but death to him who harms the child of kings. She is my spoil." Then followed terrible sights and sounds. The cunning Abati had stretched ropes outside the doors. It was the noise they made at this work which had reached Roderick's ears earlier during the darkness. The terrified soldiers, flying from the fire, stumbled and fell over these ropes, nor could they rise again because of those who pressed behind. What happened to them all, I am sure I do not know, but doubtless many were crushed to death, and many more killed by Joshua's men. I trust, however, that some of them escaped, since, compared to the rest of the Abati, they were as lions are to cats, although, like all their race, they lacked the stamina to fight an uphill game. It was at the commencement of this terrific scene that I shot the foul-mouthed singer. "You shouldn't have done that, old fellow," screamed Higgs in his high voice, striving to make himself heard above the tumult, "as it will show those swine where we are." "I don't think they will look for us here anyway," I answered. Then we watched a while in silence. "Come," said Orme at length, taking Maqueda by the hand. "Where are you going, O Oliver?" she asked, hanging back. "Sooner will I burn than yield to Joshua." "I am going to the cave city," he answered. "We have nowhere else to go, and little time to lose. 4 men with rifles can hold that place against 1,000. Come." "I obey," she answered, bowing her head. We went down the stairway that led from the roof, on which the inhabitants of the palace were accustomed to spend much of their day, and even to sleep in hot weather, as is common in the East. Another minute, and we should have been too late. The fire from one of the domes had spread to the upper story, and was already appearing in little tongues of flame, mingled with jets of black smoke, through cracks in the crumbling partition wall. As a matter of fact, this wall fell in just as my son Roderick, the last of us, was passing down the stairs. With the curiosity of youth, he had lingered for a few moments to watch the sad scene below, a delay which nearly cost him his life. On the ground floor we found ourselves out of immediate danger, since the fire was attacking this part of the palace from above and burning downward. We had even time to go to our respective sleeping places and collect such of our possessions and valuables as we were able to carry. Fortunately, among other things, these included all our notebooks, which today are of priceless value. Laden with these articles, we met again in the audience hall, which, although it was very hot, seemed, as it had always been, a huge empty place, whereof the roof, painted with stars, was supported upon thick cedar columns, each of them hewn from a single tree. Passing down that splendid apartment, which an hour later had ceased to exist, lamps in hand, for these we had found time to fetch and light, we reached the mouth of the passage that led to the underground city without meeting a single human being. Had the Abati been a different race, they could perfectly well have dashed in and made us prisoners, for the drawbridge was still intact. But their cowardice was our salvation, for they feared lest they should be trapped by the fire. So I think at least, but justice compels me to add that, on the spur of the moment, they may have found it impossible to clear the gateways of the mass of fallen or dead soldiers over which it would have been difficult to climb. Such, at any rate, was the explanation that we heard afterwards. We reached the mouth of the vast cave in perfect safety, and clambered through the little orifice which was left between the rocks, rolled thither by the force of the explosion, or shaken down from the roof. This hole, for it was nothing more, we proceeded to stop with a few stones in such a fashion that it could not be forced without much toil and considerable noise, only leaving one little tortuous channel through which, if necessary, a man could creep. The labour of rock carrying, in which even Maqueda shared, occupied our minds for a while, and induced a kind of fictitious cheerfulness. But when it was done, and the chilly silence of that enormous cave, so striking in comparison with the roar of the flames and the hideous human tumult which we had left without, fell upon us like sudden cold and blinding night upon a wanderer in windy, sunlit mountains, all our excitement perished. In a flash we understood our terrible position, we who had but escaped from the red fire, to perish slowly in the black darkness. Still we strove to keep our spirits as best we could. Leaving Higgs to watch the blocked passage, a somewhat superfluous task, since the fire without was our best watchman, the rest of us threaded our way up the cave, following the telephone wire which poor Quick had laid on the night of the blowing up of the god Harmac, till we came to what had been our headquarters during the digging of the mine, into the room which was Oliver's, whence we had escaped with so much difficulty after that event. We could not enter because of the transom that blocked the doorway. Still, there were plenty of others at hand in the old temple, although they were foul with refuge of the bats that wheeled about us in thousands, for these creatures evidently had some unknown access to the open air. One of these rooms had served as our store chamber, and after a few rough preparations we assigned it to Maqueda. "Friends," she said, as she surveyed its darksome entrance, "it looks like the door of a tomb. Well, in the tomb there is rest, and rest I must have. Leave me to sleep, who, were it not for you, O Oliver, would pray that I might never wake again. Man," she added passionately, before us all, for now in the face of the last peril, every false shame and wish to conceal the truth had left her, "man, why were you born to bring woe upon my head and joy to my heart?" Well, well, the joy outweighs the woe, and even if the angel who led you hither is named Azrael, Still I shall bless him who has revealed to me my soul. Yet for you I weep, and if only your life could be spared to fulfill itself in happiness in the land that bore you, oh, for you I would gladly die." Now Oliver, who seemed deeply moved, stepped to her and began to whisper into her ear, evidently making some proposal, of which I think I can guess the nature. She listened to him, smiling sadly, and made a motion with her hand as though to thrust him away. "Not so," she said, "it is nobly offered, but did I accept, through whatever universes I may wander, those who came after me would know me by my trail of blood, the blood of him who loved me. Perhaps, too, by that crime I should be separated from you for ever. Moreover, I tell you that though all seems black as this thick darkness, I believe that things will yet end well for you and me in this world or another." Then she was gone, leaving Orme staring after her like a man in a trance. "I dare say they will," remarked Higgs, sotto voce, to me, "and that's first rate so far as they are concerned. But what I should jolly well like to know is how they are going to end for us who haven't got a charming lady to see us across the Styx." "You needn't puzzle your brain over that," I answered gloomily, "for I think there will soon be a few more skeletons in this beastly cave, that's all. Don't you see that those Abati will believe we are burned in the palace?" End of chapter 18.
Chapter 19, Queen Sheba's Ring. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Queen Sheba's Ring by H. Rider Haggard, Chapter 19. Starvation. I was right. The Abati did think that we had burned. It never occurred to them that we might have escaped to the underground city. So at least I judged from the fact that they made no attempt to seek us there until they learned the truth in the fashion that I am about to describe. If anything, this safety from our enemies added to the trials of those hideous days and nights. Had there been assaults to repel and the excitement of striving against overwhelming odds, at any rate we should have found occupation for our minds and remaining energies. But there were none. By turns we listened at the mouth of the passage for the echo of footsteps that never came. Nothing came to break the silence so intense that at last our ears, craving for sound, magnified the soft flitter of the bats into a noise as of eagle's wings, till at last we spoke in whispers, because the full voice of man seemed to affront the solemn quietude, seemed intolerable to our nerves. Yet for the first day or two we found occupation of a sort. Of course, our first need was to secure a supply of food, of which we had only a little originally laid up for our use in the chambers of the old temple, 10 meats that we had brought from London and so forth, nearly all consumed. We remembered that Maqueda had told us of corn from her estates, which was stored annually in pits to provide against the possibility of a siege of Mur, and asked her where it was. She led us to a place where round stone covers, with rings attached to them, were let into the floor of the cave, not unlike those which stop the coal chutes in a town pavement, only larger. With great difficulty we prized one of these up. To me, it did not seem to have been moved since the ancient kings ruled in Mur. After leaving it open for a while, for the air within to purify, lowered Roderick by a rope we had to report its contents. Next moment we heard him saying, "Want to come up, please? This place is not pleasant." We pulled him out and asked what he had found. "Nothing good to eat," he answered. "Only plenty of dead bones and one rat that ran up my leg." We tried the next 2 pits with the same result. They were full of human bones. Then we cross-examined Maqueda, who, after reflection, informed us that she now remembered that about 5 generations before, a great plague had fallen on Mur, which reduced its population by 1/2. She had heard also that those stricken with the plague were driven into the underground city in order that they might not infect the others, and supposed that the bones we saw were their remains. This information caused us to close up those pits in a great hurry, though it really did not matter whether we caught the plague or no. Still, as she was sure that corn was buried somewhere, we went to another group of pits in a distant chamber and opened the first one. This time, our search was rewarded, to the extent that we found at the bottom of it some moldering dust that years ago had been grain. The other pits, 2 of which had been sealed up within 3 years as the date upon the wax showed, were quite empty. Then Maqueda understood what had happened. "Surely the Abati are a people of rogues," she said. "See now, the officers appointed to store away my corn which I gave them have stolen it. Oh, may they live to lack bread even more bitterly than we do today." We went back to our sleeping place in silence. Well, might we be silent? For of food we had only enough left for a single scanty meal. Water there was plenty, but no food. When we had recovered a little from our horrible disappointment, we consulted together. "If we could get through the mine tunnel," said Oliver, "we might escape into the den of lions, which were probably all destroyed by the explosion, and so out into the open country." "The fung would take us there," suggested Higgs. No, broke in Roderick. "Fung all gone, or if they do, anything better than this black hole, yes, even my wife." "Let us look," I said, and we started. When we reached the passage that led from the city to the Tomb of Kings, it was to find that the wall at the end of it had been blown bodily back into the parent cave, leaving an opening through which we could walk side by side. Of course, the contents of the tomb itself were scattered. In all directions lay bones, objects of gold and other metals, and overturned thrones. The roof and walls alone remained as they had been. "What vandalism!" exclaimed Higgs, indignant even in his misery. "Why wouldn't you let me move the things when I wanted to, Orme?" "Because they would have thought that we were stealing them, old fellow. Also, those mountaineers were superstitious, and I did not want them to desert. But what does it matter anyway? If you had, they would have burned in the palace." By this time, we had reached that end of the vast tomb where the hunchbacked king used to sit, and saw at once that our quest was in vain. The tunnel which we had dug beyond was utterly choked with masses of fallen rock, and we could never hope to remove, even with the aid of explosives, of which we had none left. So we returned, our last hope gone. Also, another trouble stared us in the face. Our supply of the crude mineral oil which the Abati used for the lighting purposes was beginning to run low. Measurement of what remained of the store laid up for our use while the mine was being made revealed the fact that there was only enough left to supply 4 lamps for about 3 days and nights, 1 for Maqueda, 1 for ourselves, 1 for the watchman near the tunnel mouth, and 1 for general purposes. This general purpose lamp, as a matter of fact, was mostly made use of by Higgs. Truly, he furnished a striking instance of the ruling passion strong in death. All through those days of starvation and utter misery, until he grew too weak and the oil gave out, he trudged backward and forward between the old temple and the Tomb of Kings, carrying a large basket on his arm. Going out with this basket empty, he would bring it back filled with gold cups and other precious objects that he had collected from among the bones and scattered rubbish in the tomb. These objects he laboriously catalogued in his pocketbook at night, and afterwards packed away in empty cases that had contained our supplies of explosives and other goods, carefully nailing them down when filled. "What on earth are you doing that for, Higgs?" I asked petulantly as he finished off another case. I think it was his 20th. "I don't know, Doctor," he answered in a thin voice. For, like the rest of us, he was growing feeble on a water diet. "I suppose it amuses me to think how jolly it would be to open all these boxes in my rooms in London after a first-rate dinner of fried sole and steak cut thick." And he smacked his poor hungry lips. Yes, he went on, "to take them out one by one and show them to, and he mentioned by name officials of sundry great museums with whom he was at war, and see them tear their hair with rage and jealousy, while they wondered in their hearts if they could not manage to seize the lot for the crown as treasure trove, or do me out of them somehow," and he laughed a little in his old pleasant fashion. Of course I never shall, he added sadly. But perhaps one day some other fellow will find them here and get them to Europe, and if he is a decent chap, publish my notes and descriptions, of which I have put a duplicate in each box, and so make my name immortal. Well, I'm off again. There are 4 more cases to fill before the oil gives out, and I must get that great gold head into one of them, though it is an awful job to carry it far at a time. Doctor, what disease is it that makes your legs suddenly give way beneath you, so that you find yourself sitting in a heap on the floor without knowing how you came there? You don't know? Well, no more do I, but I've got it bad. I tell you, I'm downright sore behind from continual and unexpected contact with the rock. Poor old Higgs. I did not like to tell him that his disease was starvation. Well, he went on with his fetching and carrying and cataloging and packing. I remember that the last load he brought in was that golden head he had spoken of, the wonderful likeness of some prehistoric king which has since excited so much interest throughout the world. The thing being too heavy for him to carry in his weakened state, for it was much over life size, he was obliged to roll it before him, which accounts for the present somewhat damaged condition of the nose and semi-Egyptian diadem. Never shall I forget the sight of the professor as he appeared out of the darkness, shuffling along upon his knees where his garments were worn into holes, and by the feeble light of the lamp that he moved from time to time, painfully pushing the great yellow object forward, only a foot or 2 at each push. Here it is at last, he gasped triumphantly, whilst we watched him with indifferent eyes. Japhet, help me to wrap it up in the mat and lift it into the box. No, you donkey. Face upward so. Never mind the corners. I'll fill them with ring money and other trifles. And out of his wide pockets he emptied a golden shower, amongst which he sifted handfuls of dust from the floor and anything else he could find to serve as packing, finally covering all with a goat's hair blanket which he took from his bed. Then, very slowly, he found the lid of the box and nailed it down, resting between every few strokes of the hammer whilst we watched him in our intent but idle fashion, wondering at the strange form of his madness. At length the last nail was driven, and seated on the box, he put his hand into an inner pocket to find his notebook, then incontinently fainted. I struggled to my feet and sprinkled water over his face till he revived and rolled onto the floor, where presently he sank into sleep or torpor. As he did so, the first lamp gave out. Light it, Japhet, said Maqueda. It is dark in this place. O child of kings, answered the man, I would obey if I could, but there is no more oil. Half an hour later, the second lamp went out. By the light that remained, we made such arrangements as we could, knowing that soon darkness would be on us. They were few and simple. The fetching of a jar or 2 of water, the placing of arms and ammunition to our hands, and the spreading out of some blankets on which to lie down side by side upon what I for one believed would be our bed of death. While we were thus engaged, Japhet crawled into our circle from the outer gloom. Suddenly, I saw his haggard face appear, looking like that of a spirit rising from the grave. My lamp is burned out, he moaned. It began to fail whilst I was on the watch at the tunnel mouth, and before I was halfway here, it died altogether. Had it not been for the wire of the thing that speaks which guided me, I could never have reached you. I should have been lost in the darkness of the city and perished alone among the ghosts. Well, you're here now, said Oliver. Have you anything to report? Nothing, Lord, or at least very little. I moved some of the small rocks that we piled up and crept down the hole till I came to a place where the blessed light of day fell upon me. Only one little ray of it, but still the light of day. I think that something has fallen upon the tunnel and broken it, perhaps one of the outer walls of the palace. At least I looked through the crack and saw everywhere ruins that still smoke. From among them I heard the voices of men shouting to each other. One of them called out to his companion that it was strange, if the Gentiles and the child of kings had perished in the fire, that they had not found their bones, which would be known by the guns they carried. His friend answered that it was strange indeed, but being magicians, perhaps they had hidden away somewhere. For his part, he hoped so, as then sooner or later they would be found and put to death slowly, as they deserved, who had led astray the child of kings and brought so many of the heaven-descended Abati to their death. Then, Fearing lest they should find and kill me, for they drew near as I could tell by their voices, I crept back again, and that is all my story. We said nothing. There seemed to be nothing to say, but sat in our sad circle and watched the dying lamp. When it began to flicker, leaping up and down like a thing alive, a sudden panic seized poor Japhet. "O Walda Nagasta," he cried, throwing himself at her feet. "You have called me a brave man, but I am only brave where the sun and the stars shine. Here in the dark amongst so many angry spirits and with hunger gnawing at my bowels, I am a great coward. Joshua himself is not such a coward as I. Let us go out into the light while there is yet time. Let us give ourselves up to the prince. Perhaps he will be merciful and spare our lives, or at least he will spare yours. And if we die, it will be with the sun shining on us." But Maqueda only shook her head, whereon he turned to Orme and went on. "Lord, would you have the blood of the child of kings upon your hands? Is it thus that you repay her for her love? Lead her forth. No harm will come to her who otherwise must perish here in misery." "You hear what the man says, Maqueda," said Orme heavily. "There is some truth in it. It really does not matter to us whether we die in the power of the Abati or hear of starvation. In fact, I think we should prefer the former, and doubtless no hand will be laid on you. Will you go?" "Nay," she answered passionately. "A hand would be laid on me, the hand of Joshua, and rather than that he should touch me, I will die 100 deaths. Let fate take its course, for as I have told you, I believe that then it will open us to some gate we cannot see. And if I believe in vain, why, there is another gate which we can pass together, O Oliver, and beyond that gate lies peace. Bid the man be silent, or drive him away. Let him trouble me no more." The lamp flame sank low. It flickered once, twice, thrice, each time showing the pale, drawn faces of us 6 seated about it, like wizards making an incantation, like corpses in a tomb. Then it went out. How long were we in that place after this? At least 3 whole days and nights, I believe, if not more, but of course we soon lost all count of time. At first we suffered agonies from famine, which we strove in vain to assuage with great draughts of water. No doubt these kept us alive, but even Higgs, who it may be remembered was a teetotaler, afterwards confessed to me that he has loathed the sight and taste of water ever since. Indeed, he now drinks beer and wine like other people. It was torture. We could have eaten anything. In fact, the professor did manage to catch and eat a bat that got entangled in his red hair. He offered me a bite of it, I remember, and was most grateful when I declined. The worst of it was also that we had a little food, a few hard ship's biscuits, which we saved up for a purpose, namely to feed Maqueda. This was how we managed it. At certain intervals, I would announce that it was time to eat, and hand Maqueda her biscuit. Then we would all pretend to eat also, saying how much we felt refreshed by the food and how we longed for more, smacking our lips and biting on a piece of wood so that she could not help hearing us. This piteous farce went on for 48 hours or more until at last the wretched Japhet, who was quite demoralized and in no mood for acting, betrayed us, exactly how I cannot remember. After this, Maqueda would touch nothing more, which did not greatly matter as there was only 1 biscuit left. I offered it to her, whereon she thanked me and all of us for our courtesy toward a woman, took the biscuit, and gave it to Japhet, who ate it like a wolf. It was some time after this incident that we discovered Japhet to be missing. At least we could no longer touch him, nor did he answer when we called. Therefore, we concluded that he had crept away to die, and I am sorry to say, thought little more about it. After all, what he suffered, or had suffered, we suffered also. I recall that before we were overtaken by the last sleep, a strange fit came upon us. Our pangs passed away, much as the pain does when mortification follows a wound, and with them the horrible craving for nutriment. We grew cheerful and talked a great deal. Thus, Roderick gave me the entire history of the Fung people and of his life among them and other savage tribes. Further, he explained every secret detail of their idol worship to Higgs, who was enormously interested and tried to make some notes by the aid of our few remaining matches. When even that subject was exhausted, he sang to us in his beautiful voice. English hymns, and Arab songs. Oliver and Maqueda also chatted together quite gaily, for I heard them laughing and gathered that he was engaged in trying to teach her English. The last thing that I recollect is the scene as it was revealed by the momentary light of one of the last matches. Maqueda sat by Oliver. His arm was about her waist, her head rested upon his shoulder, her long hair flowed loose, her large and tender eyes stared from her white, wan face up toward his, which was almost that of a mummy. Then, on the other side, stood my son, supporting himself against the wall of the room, and beyond him, Higgs, a shadow of his former self, feebly waving a pencil in the air and trying apparently to write a note upon his Panama straw hat, which he held in his left hand, as I suppose imagining it to be a pocketbook. The incongruity of that sun hat in a place where no sun had ever come made me laugh. And as the match went out, I regretted that I had forgotten to look at his face to ascertain whether he was still wearing his smoked spectacles. What is the use of a straw hat and smoked spectacles in Kingdom Come? I kept repeating to myself, while Roderick, whose arm I knew was about me, seemed to answer. The Fung wizards say that the Sphinx Harmac once wore a hat, but my father, I do not know if he had spectacles. Then, a sensation as of being whirled round and round in some vast machine, down the sloping sides of which I sank at last into a vortex of utter blackness, whereof I knew the name was death. Dimly, very dimly, I became aware that I was being carried. I heard voices in my ears, but what they said I could not understand. Then, a feeling of light struck upon my eyeballs, which gave me great pain. Agony ran all through me as it does through the limbs of one who is being brought back from death by drowning. After this, something warm was poured down my throat and I went to sleep. When I awoke again, it was to find myself in a large room that I did not know. I was lying on a bed, and by the light of sunrise, which streamed through the window places, I saw the three others, my son Roderick, Orme, and Higgs, lying on the other beds, but they were still asleep. Abati servants entered the room bringing food, a kind of rough soup with pieces of meat in it, of which they gave me a portion in a wooden bowl that I devoured greedily. Also, they shook my companions until they awoke, and almost automatically ate up the contents of similar bowls, after which they went to sleep again, as I did, thanking heaven that we were still alive. Every few hours I had a vision of these men entering with the bowls of soup or porridge until at last life and reason came back to me in earnest, and I saw Higgs sitting up on the bed opposite and staring at me. "I say, old fellow," he said, "are we alive or is this Hades?" "Can't be Hades," I answered, "because there are Abati here." "Quite right," he replied. "If the Abati go anywhere, it's to hell, where they haven't whitewashed walls and four-post beds. Oliver, wake up. We are out of that cave anyway." Orme raised himself on his hand and stared at us. "Where's Maqueda?" he asked, a question to which of course we could give no answer, till presently Roderick woke also and said, "I remember something. They carried us all out of the cave. Japhet was with them. They took the child of kings one way and us another. That is all I know." Shortly afterwards, the Abati servants arrived, bearing food more solid than the soup, and with them came one of their doctors, not that old idiot of a court physician who examined us and announced that we should all recover, a fact that we knew already. We asked many questions of him and the servants, but could get no answer, for evidently they were sworn to silence. However, we persuaded them to bring us water to wash in. It came, and with it a polished piece of metal, such as the Abati use for a looking-glass, in which we saw our faces, the terrible wasted faces of those who have gone within a hair's breadth of death by starvation in the dark. Yet, although our jailers would say nothing, something in their aspect told us that we were in sore peril of our lives. They looked at us hungrily, as a terrier looks at rats in a wire cage of which the door will presently be opened. Moreover, Roderick, who, as I think I have said, has very quick ears, overheard one of the attendants whisper to another, "When does our service on these hounds of Gentiles come to an end?" To which his fellow answered, "The council has not yet decided, but I think tomorrow or the next day. If they are strong enough, it will be a great show." Also, That evening about sunset, we heard a mob shouting outside the barrack in which we were imprisoned, for that was its real use. "Give us Gentiles, give us the Gentiles. We are tired of waiting." Until at length some soldiers drove them away. Well, we talked the thing over, only to conclude that there was nothing to be done. We had no friends in the palace except Maqueda, and she, it appeared, was a prisoner, like ourselves, and therefore could not communicate with us. Nor could we see the slightest possibility of escape. "Out of the frying pan and into the fire," remarked Higgs gloomily. "I wish now that they had let us die in that cave. It would have been better than being baited to death by a mob of Abati." "Yes," answered Oliver with a sigh, for he was thinking of Maqueda. "But that's why they saved us, the vindictive beasts, to kill us for what they are pleased to call high treason." "High treason!" exclaimed Higgs. "I hope to goodness their punishment for the offense is not that of medieval England. Hanging is bad enough, but the rest—" "I don't think the Abati studied European history," I broke in. "But it is no use disguising from you that they have methods of their own. Look here, friends," I added. "I have kept something about me in case the worst should come to the worst." And I produced a little bottle containing a particularly swift and deadly poison done up in tabloids, and gave one to each of them. "My advice is," I added, "that if you see we are going to be exposed to torture or to any dreadful form of death, you should take one of these, as I mean to do, and cheat the Abati of their vengeance." "That is all very fine," said the professor, as he pocketed his tabloid. "But I never could swallow a pill without water at the best of times, and I don't believe those beasts will give one any. Well, I suppose I must suck it, that's all. Oh, if only the luck would turn, if only the luck would turn." 3 more days went by without any sign of Higgs' aspiration being fulfilled. On the contrary, except in one respect, the luck remained steadily against us. The exception was that we got plenty to eat and consequently regained our normal state of health and strength more rapidly than might have been expected. With us, it was literally a case of let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. Only somehow I don't think that any of us really believed that we should die. Though whether this was because we had all, except for poor Quick, survived so much, or from a sneaking faith in Maqueda's optimistic dreams, I cannot say. At any rate, we ate our food with appetite, took exercise in an inner yard of the prison, and strove to grow as strong as we could, feeling that soon we might need all of our powers. Oliver was the most miserable among us, not for his own sake, but because, poor fellow, he was haunted with fears as to Maqueda and her fate, although of these he said little or nothing to us. On the other hand, my son Roderick was by far the most cheerful. He had lived for so many years upon the brink of death that his familiar gulf seemed to have no terrors for him. "All come right somehow, my father," he said airily. "Who can know what happened? Perhaps Child of Kings drag us out of mud hole, for after all she was very strong cow. Or what do you call it? Heifer? And I think toss Joshua if he drive her into corner, or perhaps other thing occur." "What other thing, Roderick?" I asked. "Oh, don't know, can't say, but I think fung thing. Believe we not done with fung yet. Believe they not run far. Believe they take thought for morrow and come back again. Only," he added sadly, "hope my wife not come back, for that old girl too full of lofty temper for me. Still, cheer up. Not dead yet by long day's march. And meanwhile, food good, and this very jolly rest after beastly underground city. Now I tell Professor some more stories about Fung religion, den of lions, and so forth." On the morning after this conversation, a crisis came. Just as we had finished breakfast, the doors of our chamber were thrown open, and in marched a number of soldiers wearing Joshua's badge. They were headed by an officer of his household, who commanded us to rise and follow him. "Where to?" asked Orme. "To take your trial before the Child of Kings and her council, Gentile, upon the charge of having murdered certain of her subjects," answered the officer sternly. "That's all right," said Higgs, with a sigh of relief. "If Maqueda is chairman of the bench, we are pretty certain of an acquittal, for Orme's sake, if not our own." "Don't you be too sure of that," I whispered into his ear. The circumstances are peculiar, and women have been known to change their minds. Adams, he replied, glaring at me through his smoked spectacles. If you talk like that, we shall quarrel. Maqueda changed her mind indeed. Why, it is an insult to suggest such a thing. And if you take my advice, you won't let Oliver hear you. Don't you remember, man, that she's in love with him? Oh, yes, I answered. But I remember also that Prince Joshua is in love with her, and that she is his prisoner. End of chapter 19.
Chapter 20 of Queen Sheba's Ring. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Queen Sheba's Ring by H. Rider Haggard. Chapter 20, The Trial and After. They set us in a line, 4 ragged-looking fellows, all of us with beards of various degrees of growth. That is, all the other 3, for mine had been an established fact for years, and everything having been taken away from us, we possessed neither razor nor scissors. In the courtyard of our barrack, we were met by a company of soldiers, who encircled us about with a triple line of men, as we thought, to prevent any attempt of escape. So soon as we passed the gates, I found, however, that this was done for a different reason, namely, to protect us from the fury of the populace. All the way from the barrack to the courthouse, whither we were being taken now that the palace was burned, the people were gathered in hundreds, literally howling for our blood. It was a strange, and in a way, a dreadful sight to see even the brightly dressed women and children shaking their fists and spitting at us with faces distorted by hate. "Why do they love you so little, father, when you do so much for them?" asked Roderick, shrugging his shoulders and dodging a stone that nearly hit him on the head. "For 2 reasons," I answered. "Because their lady loves one of us too much, and because, through us, many of their people have lost their lives. Also, they hate strangers, and are by nature cruel, like most cowards, and now that they have no more fear of the Fung, they think it will be safe to kill us." "Ah," said Roderick, "yet Harmac has come to Mur," and he pointed to the great head of the idol seated on the cliff. "And I think where Harmac goes, Fung follows, and if so, they make themselves pay plenty for my life. For I great man among Fung myself husband of Sultan's daughter. These fools, like children, because they see no Fung, think there are no Fung. Well, in 1 year, or perhaps 1 month, they learn." "I dare say, my boy," I answered, "but I am afraid that won't help us." By now we were approaching the courthouse, where the Abati priests and learned men tried civil and some criminal cases. Through a mob of nobles and soldiers who mocked us as we went, we were hustled into the large hall of judgment that was already full to overflowing. Up the center of it we marched to a clear space reserved for the parties to a cause, or prisoners and their advocates, beyond which, against the wall, were seats for the judges. These were 5 members of the council, one of whom was Joshua, while in the center, as president of the court, and wearing her veil and beautiful robes of ceremony, sat Maqueda herself. "Thank God she's safe," muttered Oliver with a gasp of relief. "Yes," answered Higgs, "but what's she doing there? She ought to be in the dock, too, not on the bench." We reached the open space, and were thrust by soldiers armed with swords to where we must stand, and although each of us bowed to her, I observed that Maqueda took not the slightest notice of our salutations. She only turned her head and said something to Joshua on her right, which caused him to laugh. Then, with startling suddenness, the case began. A kind of public prosecutor stood forward and droned out the charge against us. It was that we, who were in the employ of the Abati, had traitorously taken advantage of our position as mercenary captains to stir up a civil war, in which many people had lost their lives, and some been actually murdered by ourselves and our companion who was dead. Moreover, that we had caused their palace to be burned, and, greatest crime of all, had seized the sacred person of the Walla Nagasta, Rose of Mur, and dragged her away into the recesses of the underground city, whence she was only rescued by the chance of an accomplice of ours, one Japhet, betraying our hiding-place. This was the charge which, it will be noted, contained no allusion whatever to the love entanglement between Maqueda and Oliver. When it was finished, the prosecutor asked us what we pleaded, whereon Oliver answered as our spokesman that it was true there had been fighting and men killed, also that we had been driven into the cave. But as to all the rest, the Child of Kings knew the truth, and must speak for us as she wished. Now the audience began to shout, "They plead guilty! Give them to death!" and so forth, while the judges, rising from their seats, gathered around Maqueda and consulted her. "By heaven, I believe she is going to give us away," exclaimed Higgs, whereon Oliver turned on him fiercely and bade him hold his tongue, adding, "If you were anywhere else, you should answer for that slander." At length the consultation was finished. The judges resumed their seats, and Maqueda held up her hand. Thereon an intense silence fell upon the place. Then she began to speak in a cold, constrained voice. "Gentiles," she said, addressing us, "you have pleaded guilty to the stirring up of civil war in Mur, and to the slaying of numbers of its people, facts of which there is no need for evidence, since many widows and fatherless children can testify to them today. Moreover, you did, as alleged by my officer, commit the crime of bearing off my person into the cave, and keeping me there by force to be a hostage for your safety." We heard and gasped, Higgs ejaculating, "Good gracious, what a lie!" But none of the rest of us said anything. "For these offences," went on Maqueda, "you are all of you justly worthy of a cruel death." Then she paused, and added, "Yet, as I have the power to do, I remit the sentence. I decree that this day you and all the goods that remain to you which have been found in the cave city and elsewhere, together with camels for yourself and your baggage, shall be driven from Mur, and that if any one of you returns hither, he shall, without further trial, be handed over to the executioners. This I do, because at the beginning of your service a certain bargain was made with you, and although you have sinned so deeply, I will not suffer that the glorious honor of the Abati people shall be tarnished even by the breath of suspicion. Get you gone, wanderers, and let us see your faces no more for ever." Now the mob gathered in the hall shouted in exultation, though I heard some crying out, "No, kill them, kill them!" When the tumult had died down, Maqueda spoke again, saying, "O noble and generous Abati, you approve of this deed of mercy, you who would not be held merciless in far lands. O Abati, where, although you may not have heard of them, there are, I believe, other peoples who think themselves as great as you. You would not have it whispered, I say, that we who are the best of the world, we, the children of Solomon, have dealt harshly even with stray dogs that have wandered to our gates? Moreover, we called these dogs to hunt a certain beast for us, the lion-headed beast called Fung, and to be just to them, they hunted well. Therefore spare them the noose, though they may have deserved it, and let them run hence with their bone, say you, the bone which they think that they have earned. What does a bone more or less matter to the rich Abati, if only their holy ground is not defiled with the blood of Gentile dogs? Nothing at all, they shouted. Tie it to their tails and let them go. It shall be done, O my people. And now that we have finished with these dogs, I have another word to say to you. You may have thought or heard that I was too fond of them, and especially of one of them. And she glanced towards Oliver. Well, there are certain dogs who will not work unless you pat them on the head. Therefore I patted this one on the head, since, after all, he is a clever dog who knows things that we do not know. For instance, how to destroy the idol of the Fung. O great Abati, can any of you really have believed that I, of the ancient race of Solomon and Sheba, I, the child of kings, proposed to give my noble hand to a vagrant Gentile come hither for hire? Can you really have believed that I, the solemnly betrothed to yonder prince of princes, Joshua, my uncle, would for a moment even in my heart have preferred to him such a man as that?" And once again she looked at Oliver, who made a wild motion as though he were about to speak. But before he could so much as open his lips, Maqueda went on. "Well, if you believed, not guessing all the while I was working for the safety of my people, soon shall you be undeceived, since tomorrow night I invite you to the great ceremony of my nuptials, when, according to ancient custom, I break the glass with him whom on the following night I take to be my husband." And rising, she bowed thrice to the audience, then stretched out her hand to Joshua. He, too, rose, puffing himself out like a great turkey-cock, and taking her hand, kissed it, gobbling some words which we did not catch. Wild cheering followed, and in the momentary silence which followed, Oliver spoke. "Lady," he said in a cold and bitter voice, "we Gentiles have heard your words. We thank you for your kind acknowledgment of our services, namely, the destruction of the idol of the Fung at the cost of some risk and labor to ourselves. We thank you also for your generosity in allowing us, as the reward of that service, to depart from Mur with insult and hard words, and such goods as remain to us, instead of consigning us to death by torture, as you and your council have the power to do. It is indeed a proof of your generosity, and of that of the Abati people, which we shall always remember and repeat in our own land, should we live to reach it. Also, we trust that it will come to the ears of the savage Fung, so that at length they may understand that true nobility and greatness lie not in brutal deeds of arms, but in the hearts of men. But now, Walda Nagasta, I have a last request to make of you, namely, that I may see your face once more, to be sure that it is you who has spoken to us, and not another beneath your veil, and that if this be so, I may carry away with me a faithful picture of one so true to her country and noble to her guests, as you have shown yourself this day." She listened, then very slowly lifted her veil, revealing such a countenance as I had never seen before. It was Maqueda without a doubt, but Maqueda changed. Her face was pale, which was only to be expected after all she had gone through. Her eyes glowed in it like coals, her lips were set. But it was her expression, at once defiant and agonized, which impressed me so much that I never shall forget it. I confess I could not read in it the least, but it left upon my mind the belief that she was a false woman, and yet ashamed of her own falsity. There was the greatest triumph of her art that in those terrible circumstances she should still have succeeded in conveying to me, and to the hundreds of others who watched, this conviction of her own turpitude. For a moment her eyes met those of Orme, but although he searched them with pleading and despair in his glance, I could trace in hers no relenting sign, but only challenge not unmixed with mockery. Then, with a short hard laugh, she let fall her veil again and turned to talk with Joshua. Oliver stood silent a little while, long enough for Higgs to whisper to me, "I say, isn't this downright awful? I'd rather be back in the den of lions than live to see it." As he spoke, I saw Oliver put his hand to where his revolver usually hung, but of course it had been taken from him. Next he began to search in his pocket, and finding that tabloid of poison which I had given him, lifted it toward his mouth. But just as it touched his lips, my son, who was next to him, saw also. With a quick motion he struck it from his fingers, and ground it to powder on the floor beneath his heel. Oliver raised his arm as though to hit him, then, without a sound, fell senseless. Evidently Maqueda noted this also, for I saw a kind of quiver go through her, and her hands gripped the arms of her chair till the knuckles showed white beneath the skin. But she only said, "This Gentile has fainted because he is disappointed with his reward. Take him hence, and let his companion, the Dr. Adams, attend to him. When he is recovered, conduct them all from Mur as I have decreed. See that they go unharmed, taking with them plenty of food, lest it be said that we only spared their lives here, in order that they might starve without our gates." Then waving her hand to show that the matter was done with, she rose, and followed by the judges and officers, left the court by some door behind them. While she spoke, a strong body of guards had surrounded us, some of whom came forward and lifted the senseless Oliver onto a stretcher, They carried him down the court, the rest of us following. "Look," jeered the Abati as he passed. "Look at that Gentile pig who thought to wear the bud of the rose upon his bosom. He has got the thorn now, not the rose. Is the swine dead, think you?" Thus they mocked him and us. We reached our prison in safety, and there I set to work to revive Oliver, a task in which I succeeded at length. When he had come to himself again, he drank a cup of water, and said, quite quietly, "You fellows have seen all, so there is no need for talk and explanations. One thing I beg of you, if you are any friends of mine, and it is that you will not reproach or even speak of Maqueda to me. Doubtless she has reasons for what she did. Moreover, her bringing up has not been the same as ours, and her code is different. Do not let us judge her. I have been a great fool, that is all, and now I am paying for my folly, or rather I have paid. Come, let us have some dinner, for we don't know when we shall get another meal." We listened to this speech in silence, only I saw Roderick turn aside to hide a smile, and wondered why he smiled. Scarcely had we finished eating, or pretending to eat, when an officer entered the room and informed us roughly that it was time for us to be going. As he did so, some attendants who had followed him threw us bundles of clothes, and with them 4 very beautiful camel-hair cloaks to protect us from the cold. With some of these garments we replaced our rags, for they were little more, tying them and the rest of the outfit up into bundles. Then, clothed as the body of the upper class, we were taken to the gates of the barrack, where we found a long train of riding camels waiting for us. The moment I saw these beasts, I knew that they were the best in the whole land, and of very great value. Indeed, that to which Oliver was conducted was Maqueda's own favourite dromedary, which upon state occasions she sometimes rode instead of a horse. He recognized it at once, poor fellow, and coloured to the eyes at this unexpected mark of kindness, the only one she had vouchsafed to him. "Come, Gentiles," said the officer, "and take count of your goods, that you may not say that we have stolen anything from you. Here are your firearms and all the ammunition that is left. These will be given to you at the foot of the pass, but not before, lest you should do more murder on the road. On those camels are fastened the boxes in which you brought up the magic fire. We found them in your quarters in the cave city, ready packed, but what they contained we neither know nor care. Full or empty, take them, they are yours. Those," and he pointed to 2 other beasts, "are laden with your pay, which the Child of Kings sends to you, requesting that you will not count it till you reach Egypt or your own land, since she wishes no quarrelling with you as to the amount. The rest carry food for you to eat. Also, there are 2 spare beasts. Now mount and be gone." So we climbed into the embroidered saddles of the kneeling dromedaries, and a few minutes later were riding through Mur towards the pass, accompanied by our guard and hooting mobs that once or twice became threatening, but were driven off by the soldiers. "I say, Doctor," said Higgs to me excitedly, "do you know that we have got all the best of the treasure of the Tomb of Kings in those 25 crates? I have thought, since I was crazy when I packed them, picking out the most valuable and rare articles with such care, and filling in the cracks with ring money and small curiosities. But now I see it was an inspiration of genius. My subliminal self knew what was going to happen, and was on the job, that's all. Oh, if only we can get it safe away, I shall not have played Daniel and been nearly starved to death for nothing. Why, I'd go through it all again for that golden head alone. Shove on, before they change their minds. It seems too good to be true." Just then a rotten egg thrown by some sweet Abati youth landed full on the bridge of his nose, and dispersing itself into his mouth and over his smoked spectacles, cut short the professor's eloquence, or rather changed its tenor. So absurd was the sight that in spite of myself I burst out laughing, and with that laugh felt my heart grow lighter, as though our clouds of trouble were lifting at length. At the mouth of the pass we found Joshua himself waiting for us, clad in all his finery and chain armour, and looking more like a porpoise on horseback than he had ever done. "Farewell, Gentiles," he said, bowing to us in mockery. "We wish you a quick journey to Sheol, or whatever such swine as you may go. Listen, you Orme. I have a message for you from the Walda Nagasta. It is that she is sorry she could not ask you to stop for her nuptial feast, which she would have done had she not been sure that, if you stayed, the people would have cut your throat, and she did not wish the holy soil of Mur to be defiled with your dog's blood. Also she bids me say that she hopes that your stay here will have taught you a lesson, and that in future you will not believe that every woman who makes use of you for her own ends is therefore a victim of your charms. Tomorrow night, and the night after, I pray you think of our happiness, and drink a cup of wine to the Walda Nagasta and her husband. Come, will you not wish me joy, O Gentile?" Orme turned white as a sheet, and gazed at him steadily. Then a strange look came into his grey eyes, almost a look of inspiration. "Prince Joshua," he said in a very quiet voice, "who knows what may happen before the sun rises thrice on Mur? All things that begin well do not end well, as I have learned, and as you also may live to learn. At least, soon or late, your day of reckoning must come, and you too may be betrayed as I have been. Rather should you ask me to forgive your soul the insult that in your hour of triumph you have not been ashamed to heap upon one who is powerless to avenge them." And he urged his camel past him. As we followed, I saw Joshua's face turn as pale as Oliver's had done, and his great round eyes protrude themselves like those of a fish. "What does he mean?" said the prince to his companions. "Pray God he is not a prophet of evil. Even now I have a mind— No, let him go. To break my marriage vow might bring bad luck upon me. Let him go." And he glared after Oliver with fear and hatred written on his coarse features. That was the last we ever saw of Joshua, uncle of Maqueda, and first prince among the Abati. Down the pass we went, and through the various gates of the fortifications, which were thrown open as we came and closed behind us. We did not linger on that journey. Why should we, when our guards were anxious to be rid of us and we of them? Indeed, so soon as the last gate was behind us, either from fear of the Fung, or because they were in a hurry to return to share in the festivities of the approaching marriage, suddenly the Abati wheeled round, bade us farewell with a parting curse, and left us to our own devices. So, having roped the camels into a long line, we went on alone, truly thankful to be rid of them, and praying, every one of us, that never in this world or the next might we see the face or hear the voice of another Abati. We emerged onto the plain at the spot where months before we had held our conference with Barung, Sultan of the Fung, and where poor Quick had forced his camel onto Joshua's horse and dismounted that hero. Here we paused a while to arrange our little caravan and arm ourselves with the rifles, revolvers, and cartridges which until now we had not been allowed to touch. There were but 4 of us to manage the long train of camels, so we were obliged to separate. Higgs and I went ahead, since I was best acquainted with the desert and the road. Oliver took the central station, and Roderick brought up the rear, because he was very keen of sight and hearing, and from his long familiarity with them, knew how to drive camels that showed signs of obstinacy or a wish to turn. On our right lay the great city of Harmac. We noted that it seemed to be quite deserted. There, rebuilt now, frowned the gateway through which we had escaped from the Fung after we had blown so many of them to pieces, but beneath it none passed in or out. The town was empty, and although they were dead ripe, the rich crops had not yet been reaped. Apparently the Fung people had now left the land. Now we were opposite to the valley of Harmac, and saw that the huge sphinx still sat there as it had done for unknown thousands of years. Only its head was gone, for that had moved to Mur, and in its neck and shoulders appeared great clefts, caused by the terrific force of the explosion. Moreover, no sound came from the enclosures where the sacred lions used to be. Doubtless every one of them was dead. "Don't you think," suggested Higgs, whose archaeological zeal was rekindling fast, "that we might spare half an hour to go up the valley, and have a look at Harmac from the outside? Of course, both Roderick and I are thoroughly acquainted with his inside, and the den of lions and so forth, but I would give a great deal just to study the rest of him and take a few measurements. You know one must camp somewhere, and if we can't find the camera, at dawn one might make a sketch." "Are you mad?" I asked by way of answer, and Higgs collapsed, but to this hour he has never forgiven me. We looked our last upon Harmac, the god whose glory we had destroyed, and went on swiftly till darkness overtook us almost opposite to that ruined village where Shadrach had tried to poison the hound Pharaoh, which afterwards tore out his throat. Here we unloaded the camels, no light task, and camped, for near this spot there was water and a patch of maize on which the beasts could feed. Before the light quite faded, Roderick rode forward for a little way to reconnoitre, and presently returned, announcing shortly that he had seen no one. So we ate of the food with which the Abati had provided us, not without fear lest it should be poisoned, and then held a council of war. The question was whether we should take the old road towards Egypt, or, now that the swamps were dry, strike up northward by the other route of which Shadrach had told us. According to the map, this should be shorter, and Higgs advocated it strongly, as I discovered afterwards, because he thought there might be more archaeological remains in that direction. I, on the other hand, was in favor of following the road we knew, which, although long and very wearisome, was comparatively safe, as in that vast desert there were few people to attack us, while Oliver, our captain, listened to all we had to say and reserved his opinion. Presently, however, the question was settled for us by Roderick, who remarked that if we travelled to the north, we should probably fall in with the Fung. I asked what he meant, and he replied that when he had made his reconnaissance an hour or so before, although it was true he had seen no one, not 1,000 yards from where we sat he had come across the track of a great army. This army, from various indications, he felt sure was that of Barung, which had passed there within 12 hours. Perhaps my wife with them, so I no want to go that way, father, he added with sincere simplicity. Where could they be travelling? I asked. Don't know, he answered, but think they go round to attack Mur from other side, or perhaps to find new land to north. We will stick to the old road, said Oliver briefly. Like Roderick, I have had enough of all the inhabitants of this country. Now let us rest a while. We need it. About 2 o'clock we were up again, and before it was dawn on the following morning we had loaded our camels and were on the road. By the first faint light we saw that what Roderick had told us was true. We were crossing the track of an army of many thousand men who had passed there recently with laden camels and horses. Moreover, these men were Fung, for we picked up some articles that could have belonged to no other people, such as a headdress that had been lost or thrown away, and an arrow that had fallen from a quiver. However, we saw nothing of them, and travelling fast, to our great relief, by midday, reached the river Eber, which we crossed without difficulty, for it was now low. That night we camped in the forest lands beyond, having all the afternoon marched up the rising ground at the foot of which ran the river. Towards dawn, Higgs, whose turn it was to watch the camels, came and woke me. Sorry to disturb you, old fellow, he said, but there is a most curious sky effect behind us, which I thought you might like to see. I rose and looked. In the clear starlit night I could just discern the mighty outline of the mountains of Mur. Above them the firmament was suffused with a strange red glow. I formed my own conclusion at once, but only said, Let us go to tell Orme, and led the way to where he had lain down under a tree. He was not sleeping. Indeed, I do not think he had closed his eyes all night, the night of Maqueda's marriage. On the contrary, he was standing on a little knoll, staring at the distant mountains and the glow above them. Mur is on fire, he said solemnly. Oh, my God, Mur is on fire. And turning, he walked away. Just then Roderick joined us. Fung got into Mur, he said, and now cut throat of all Abati. We well out of that, but Pig Joshua have very warm wedding feast, because Barung hate Joshua, who try to catch him not fairly, which he never forget. Often talk of it. Poor Maqueda, I said to Higgs. What will happen to her? I don't know, he answered. But although once, like everybody else, I adored that girl, really, as a matter of justice, she deserves all she gets, the false-hearted little wretch. Still it is true, he added, relenting. She gave us very good camels, to say nothing of their loads. But I only repeated, poor Maqueda. That day we made but a short journey, since we wished to rest ourselves and fill the camels before plunging into the wilderness, and feeling sure that we should not be pursued, had no cause to hurry. At night we camped in a little hollow by a stream that ran at the foot of a rise. As dawn broke, we were awakened by the voice of Roderick, who was on watch, calling to us in tones of alarm to get up as we were followed. We sprang to our feet, seizing our rifles. Where are they? I asked. There, he said, pointing toward the rise behind us. We ran round some intervening bushes and looked to see upon its crest a solitary figure seated on a very tired horse, for it panted and its head drooped. This figure, which was entirely hidden in a long cloak with a hood, appeared to be watching our camp just as a spy might do. Higgs lifted his rifle and fired at it, but Oliver, who was standing by him, knocked the barrel up so that the bullet went high, saying, "Don't be a fool. If it is only one man, there's no need to shoot him, and if there are more, you will bring them on to us." Then the figure urged the weary horse and advanced slowly, and I noticed that it was very small. A boy, I thought to myself, who was bringing some message. The rider reached us, and slipping from the horse, stood still. "Who are you?" asked Oliver, scanning the cloaked form. "One who brings a token to you, lord," was the answer, spoken in a low and muffled voice. "Here it is." And a hand, a very delicate hand, was stretched out, holding between the fingers a ring. I knew it at once. It was Sheba's ring, which Maqueda had lent to me in proof of her good faith when I journeyed for help to England. This ring, it will be remembered, we returned to her with much ceremony at our first public audience. Oliver grew pale at the sight of it. "How did you come by this?" he asked hoarsely. "Is she who alone may wear it dead?" "Yes, yes," answered the voice. A feigned voice, as I thought. "The child of kings whom you knew is dead, and having no more need for this ancient symbol of her power, she bequeathed it to you, whom she remembered kindly at the last." Oliver covered his face with his hands and turned away. "But," went on the speaker slowly, "the woman Maqueda, whom once it is said you loved—" He dropped his hands and stared. "The woman Maqueda, whom once it is said you loved, still lives." Then the hood slipped back, and in the glow of the rising sun we saw the face beneath. It was that of Maqueda herself. A silence followed that in its way was almost awful. "My Lord Oliver," asked Maqueda presently, "do you accept my offering of Queen Sheba's ring?" Note by Maqueda. Once called Walda Nagasta and Taklawada, that is, child of kings and bud of the rose, once also by birth ruler of the Abati people, the sons of Solomon and Sheba. I, Maqueda, write this by the command of Oliver, my lord, who desires that I should set out certain things in my own words. Truly, all men are fools, and the greatest of them is Oliver, my lord, though perhaps he is almost equalled by the learned man whom the Abati called Black Windows, and by the doctor, son of Adam. Only he who is named Roderick, child of Adam, is somewhat less blind, because having been brought up among the Fung and other people of the desert, he has gathered a little wisdom. This I know because he has told me that he alone saw through my plan to save all their lives, but said nothing of it because he desired to escape from Mur, where certain death waited on him and his companions. Perhaps, however, he lies to please me. Now for the truth of the matter, which, not being skilled in writing, I will tell briefly. I was carried out of the cave city with my lord and the others, starving, too weak to kill myself, which otherwise I would have done rather than fall into the hands of my accursed uncle, Joshua. Yet I was stronger than the rest, because, as I have learned, they tricked me about those biscuits, pretending to eat when they were not eating, for which never will I forgive them. It was Japhet, a gallant man on one side, but a coward on the other like the rest of the Abati, who betrayed us, driven thereto by emptiness within, which, after all, is an ill enemy to fight. He went out and told Joshua where we lay hid, and then, of course, they came. Well, they took away my lord and the others, and me too they bore to another place, and fed me till my strength returned. And oh, how good was that honey which first I ate, for I could touch nothing else. When I was strong again, came Prince Joshua to me and said, "Now I have you in my net, now you are mine." Then I answered Joshua, "Fool, your net is of air, I will fly through it." "How?" he asked. "By death," I answered, "of which 100 means lie to my hand. You have robbed me of one, but what does that matter when so many remain? I will go where you and your love cannot pursue me, Very well, child of kings, he said. But how about that tall Gentile who was caught your eyes, and his companions? They too have recovered, and they shall die every one of them after a certain fashion, which I, Maqueda, will not set down, since there are some things that ought not to be written. If you die, they die. As I told you, they die as a wolf dies that is caught by the shepherds. They die as a baboon dies that is caught by the husbandmen. Now I looked this way and that, and found that there was no escape. So I made a bargain. Joshua, I said, let these men go, and I swear upon the name of our mother, she of Sheba, that I will marry you. Keep them and kill them, and you will have none of me. Well, in the end, because he desired me and the power that went with me, he consented. Then I played my part. My lord and his companions were brought before me, and in the presence of all the people I mocked them. I spat in their faces, and, oh, fools, 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 they believed me. I lifted my veil and showed them my eyes, and they believed also what they seemed to see in my eyes, forgetting that I am a woman who can play a part at need. Yes, they forgot that there were others to deceive as well, all the Abati people, who, if they thought I tricked them, would have torn the foreigners limb from limb. That was my bitterest morsel, that I should have succeeded in making even my own lord believe that of all the wicked women that ever trod this world, I was the most vile. Yet I did so, and he could not deny it, for often we have talked of this thing till he will hear of it no more. Well, they went with all that I could give them, though I knew well that my lord cared nothing for what I could give, nor the doctor, child of Adam, either, who cared only for his son that God had restored to him. Only Black Windows cared, not because he loves wealth, but because he worships all that is old and ugly, for of such things he fashions up his God. They went, for their going was reported to me, and I entered into hell because I knew that my lord thought me false, and that he would never learn the truth, namely, that what I did to save his life, until at length he came to his own country, if ever he came there, and opened the chests of treasure, if ever he opened them, which perhaps he would not care to do. And all that while he would believe me the wife of Joshua, and... oh, I cannot write of it. And I should be dead, I could not tell him the truth until he joined me in that land of death, if there men and women may talk together any more. For this, and no other, was a road that I had planned to walk. When he and his companions had gone so far that they could not be followed, then I would tell Joshua and the Abati all the truth, in such a language as should never be forgotten for generations, and kill myself before their eyes, so that Joshua might lack a wife, and the Abati a child of kings. I sat through the feast of preparation, and smiled and smiled. It passed, and the next day passed, and came the night of the feast of marriage. The glass was broken, the ceremony was fulfilled. Joshua rose up to pledge me before all the priests, lords, and headmen. He devoured me in his hateful eyes, me who was already his. But I handled the knife in my robe, wishing, such was the rage of my heart, that I could kill him also. Then God spoke, and the dream that I had dreamed came true. Far away there rose a single cry, and after it other cries, and the sounds of shouting and of marching feet. Far away tongues of fire leapt into the air, and each man asked his neighbor, "What is this?" Then from all the thousands of the feasting people rose one giant scream, and that scream said, "Fung! Fung! The Fung are on us! Fly! Fly! Fly!" "Come!" shouted Joshua, seizing me by the arm. But I drew my dagger on him, and he let go. Then he fled with the other lords, and I remained in my high seat beneath the golden canopy alone. The people fled past me without fighting. They fled into the cave city. They fled to the rocks. They hid themselves among the precipices, and after them came the Fung, slaying and burning, till all Mur went up in flames. And I sat and watched, waiting till it was time for me to die also. At last, I know not how long afterwards, appeared before me Barung, a red sword in his hand, which he lifted to me in salute. "Greeting, child of kings," he said. "You see Harmac is come to sleep at Mur." "Yes," I answered, "Harmac is come to sleep at Mur, and many of those who dwelt there sleep with him. What of it? Say, Barung, will you kill me, or shall I kill myself?" "Neither, child of kings," he answered in his high fashion. "Did I not make you a promise yonder in the Pass of Mur, when I spoke with you and the Western man? And does a Fung Sultan break his word? I have taken back the city that was ours, as I swore to do, and purified it with fire." And he pointed to the raging flames. "Now I will rebuild it, and you shall rule under me." "Not so," I answered, "but in place of that promise I ask of you 3 things." "Name them," said Barung. "They are these. First, that you give me a good horse and 5 days' food, and let me go where I will. Second, that if he still lives, you advance one Japhet, a certain mountaineer who befriended me and brought others to do likewise, to a place of honor under you. Thirdly, that you spare the rest of the Abati people." "You shall go whither you desire, and I think I know where you will go," answered Barung. "Certain spies of mine last night saw 4 white men riding on fine camels toward Egypt, and reported it to me as I led my army to the secret pass that Harmac showed me, which you Abati could never find. But I said, let them go. It is right that brave men who have been the mark of the Abati should be allowed their freedom. Yes, I said this, although one of them was my daughter's husband, or near to it. But she will have no more of him who fled to his father rather than with her, so it was best that he should go also, since, if I brought him back, it must be to his death." "Yes," I answered boldly, "I go after the Western men. I who have done with these Abati. I wish to see new lands." "And find an old love who thinks ill of you just now," he said, stroking his beard. "Well, no wonder, for there has been a marriage feast. Say, what were you about to do, O child of kings? Take the fat Joshua to your breast?" "Nay, Barung, I was about to take this husband to my breast," and I showed him the knife that was hidden in my marriage robes. "No," he said, smiling, "I think that knife was for Joshua first. Still, you are a brave woman who could save the life of him you love at the cost of your own. Yet, bethink you, child of kings, for many a generation your mothers have been queens, and under me you may still remain a queen. How will one whose blood has ruled so long endure to serve a Western man in a strange land? That is what I go to find out, Barung, and if I cannot endure, then I shall come back again, though not to rule the Abati, of whom I wash my hands for ever. Yet, Barung, my heart tells me I will endure." "The child of kings has spoken," he said, bowing to me. "My best horse awaits her, and 5 of my bravest guards shall ride with her to keep her safe till she sights the camp of the Western men. I say happy is he of them who was born to wear the sweet-scented bud of the rose upon his bosom. For the rest, the man Japhet is in my hands. He yielded himself to me who would not fight for his own people because of what they had done to his friends, the white men. Lastly, already I have given orders that the slaying should cease, since I need the Abati to be my slaves, they who are cowards, but cunning in many arts. Only one more man shall die," he added sternly, "and that is Joshua, who would have taken me by a trick in the mouth of the pass. So plead not for him, for by the head of Harmac it is in vain." Now hearing this I did not plead, fearing lest I should anger Barung, and but waste my breath. At daybreak I started on the horse, having with me the 5 Fung captains. As we crossed the market-place I met those that remained alive of the Abati, being driven in hordes like beasts, to hear their doom. Among them was Prince Joshua, my uncle, whom a man led by a rope round his neck, while another man thrust him forward from behind, since Joshua knew that he went to his death, and the road was one which he did not wish to travel. He saw me, and cast himself down upon the ground, crying to me to save him. I told him that I could not, though it is the truth, I swear it before God, that notwithstanding all the evil he had worked toward me, toward Oliver my lord and his companions, bringing to his end that gallant man who died to protect me, I would still have saved him if I could. But I could not, for although I tried once more, Barung would not listen. So I answered, "Plead, O Joshua, with him who has the power in Mur today, for I have none. You have fashioned your own fate, and must travel the road you chose." "What road do you ride, mounted on a horse of the plains, Maqueda? Oh, What need is there for me to ask? You go to see that accursed Gentile, whom I would I had killed by inches, as I would that I could kill you." Then calling me by evil names, Joshua sprang at me as though to strike me down, but he who held the rope about his neck jerked him backwards, so that he fell, and I saw his face no more. But oh, it was sad, that journey across the great square, for the captive Abati by hundreds, men, women, and children together, with tears and lamentations cried to me to preserve them from death or slavery at the hands of the Fung. But I answered, "Your sins against me and the brave foreign men who fought so well for you, I forgive. But search your hearts, O Abati, and say if you can forgive yourselves. If you had listened to me and to those whom I called in to help us, we might have beaten back the Fung and remained free forever. But you were cowards. You would not learn to bear arms like men. You would not even watch your mountain walls, and soon or late the people who refuse to be ready to fight must fall and become the servants of those who are ready. And now, my Oliver, I have no more to write, save that I am glad to have endured so many things, and thereby win the joy that is mine today. Not yet have I, Maqueda, wished to reign again in Mur, who have found another throne. End of chapter 20. Recording by Todd. End of Queen Sheba's Ring by H. Rider Haggard.